just wanted to say a very warm welcome to Tasting Climate Change in Nova Scotia. And thank you all for being here with us today. It's really an honor to have Tasting Climate Change come to Nova Scotia. This is actually the first time that the conference, which was founded in Quebec, has tried this new model, so trialing a model outside of Quebec, and they chose Nova Scotia. So it's very exciting that we have this important discussion taking place here in our region. And it's one of the reasons why when Michelle and Mark reached out, I thought this is such a smart model because, as we all know, topics can be very regionally specific. And I really like the idea that we are kind of laser focused on issues that are relevant to Nova Scotia within the broader context of the topic of climate change. So really excited to be here and to have you all with us. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are gathered in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people who have been here for thousands of years. We believe that being present on the land means recognizing and honoring its past inhabitants while staying in tune with the health of our soil and vines. I also wanted to take a few minutes. Michelle asked me to speak about Lightfoot and Wolfville, kind of what we do here and what some of our sustainable practices are. So for those who don't know, Lightfoot and Wolfville is first and foremost a multi-generational family farm. So we've been caring for this land for 4 generations now, and have become intimately aware of the changing growing environment. And what we're able to grow here today is very different than what was possible even a few short decades ago. So it's happening quickly. We're seeing changes here on our own farm, and yeah. Definitely, as we look to the future, recognizing the importance of days like today to gather and share experiences, share knowledge, and discuss further ways that we can come together to mitigate climate change and operate more sustainably. Michelle also asked me to speak quickly to our biodynamic philosophy here. So we are a certified EcoCert organic winery as well as biodynamic farm winery. So very proud to be just one of 5 or 6 in all of Canada to carry the stringent emitter certification, ensuring a high degree of sustainability across our practices. And just very quickly, what that means in practice in the vineyard, basically there's all the same practices as organic, so no synthetic fertilizers, no chemical-based sprays, fungicides, herbicides. But we're also looking at the vineyard holistically and looking to enhance the health of the soil and vine from the outset. So we're producing compost with waste materials from the farm, our own livestock manures from livestock that are living right here, and other kind of otherwise wasteful organic matter that is going into that, going back into our soil to enhance the soil health. And as I said, really just so happy to have you all here today, always looking to learn from one another. It's great to see so many familiar faces, industry friends in the room today. So thank you all for coming out to support this and for being here together. I would like to introduce Michelle Bouffard, who is the brilliant mind behind Tasting Climate Change, and also Mark DeWolf, who are really the masterminds who brought this event to Nova Scotia and brought us all here today. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here. Before we start, can you raise a hand, people who were there last night at dinner? Yeah, so there's a few people. My name is Michelle Bouffard. I am the founder of Tasting Climate Change. Just to give you a bit of background on Tasting Climate Change, I've had an interest in climate change since 2005, so before it became, unfortunately, the flavor of the hour. And at the time, I was much younger and didn't really have the connection in the wine industry. And I thought one day when I have more connection and I have more knowledge, I will do something about this because it's going to be the biggest threat. So I started climate change in 2017. And the idea really was to bring people together to exchange on the solution to adapt and mitigate climate change. You know, the wine industry is very fragmented. If you're a farmer, you're busy dealing with so many things on top of trying to export your wine to so many markets. You're not always aware of the research that are getting done or the solution that might exist out there. So my idea was to bring people from the sommelier to the grower in the same room so that we could all look at the solution and learn what could be done from the vineyard to the glass. And so Tasting Climate Change happens every 2 years, the big international conference, I would say. This is kind of a little in between for Nova Scotia. If you go on the website, tastingclimatechange.com, you actually can see all the past conferences, the videos. So there's a lot of information. The last conference was a bit of a different setup because it was the pandemic. So the 2021 conference was online. I had 31 speakers from all over the world, over 600 people attending from all different countries. But everything was recorded, and so it's great source of information. For those who speak French, I know that someone came to me earlier with my book. I wrote a book with a scientist based in New Zealand called Hervé Quenol and a master of wine called Jérémy Courkingman in Paris. We wrote a book that was published in France in 2021, and the book is currently being translated in Spanish and in English. So we're hoping to have both versions by the end of the year. So if you speak French, you can read, but for those who don't, the book will be available by the end of the year. And if you want to mark your calendar, the next international conference will be in January 2024 in Montreal. It's going to be over 2 full days. So usually this is kind of a small version of Tasting Climate Change, but usually we have about 500 people in the room, people from all over the world. And so January 22nd, 23rd, over 2 full days, and we'll have different speakers focusing on different topics. And every year I try to raise a new topic that wasn't brought before, so that if you weren't there, you can go to the website to look at the previous video, or otherwise kind of get acquainted with new solutions. And we cannot undermine what sometimes a conversation can do. That means a conversation that you can have today when you leave this room. The goal with today is to get you inspired. Climate change is overwhelming for all of us. The new generation are suffering from eco-anxiety. But I believe that if you focus on the solution, you already feel empowered because you're already in that movement of what can be done. And it takes away the anxiety because you're in action, you're doing something. And I remember when I first started the conference in 2017, I've been lucky because Wine and Spirit magazine based in New York have been my media sponsors from day one. And Josh, the owner, Josh Green, he was there from the beginning, but in 2021, after the conference, he wrote me and said, I want you to read this before it goes out to the world, to the media, but I've made a decision to change my business model with the magazine and to reduce the print and go more online. And this is a result of attending this conference for the last 3 editions. So sometimes you share an idea with a friend, with someone you know, and it might not happen now, but it's down the road that the thought keeps on going of what can be done and what we can all start. So I really encourage you when you leave today to share this conversation with someone else. And we're filming today because we want to make this available afterwards for people who could not be there so that they can actually learn from the speakers that we will have today. Before we have Debbie Inglis, our keynote speaker, and the panelists, I thought I would do an overall presentation on climate change. What is happening now? It's going to be fairly quick, about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, so that when we dig it into a deeper conversation with the panelists and with Debbie, we have some sort of information about what is going on, and I think it's going to be a bit more easy to go deep in the discussion afterwards. We do apologize, the screen are a bit small, so some of the numbers when Debbie and I present, it might be tough to see them. We're actually gonna say out the numbers that matter, so don't worry, we'll guide you through it. And also the presentation we'll send you a link after of the recording. So if you feel like you don't have the presentation with you, don't worry, we'll send you the link and you can see closely what the PowerPoint was with all the numbers. Does it work? Great. So before we start, I thought we're gonna have a look at where we're at right now. No doubt, the growth of population. Humans are creating the greenhouse emissions. So the increase of CO2 in the atmosphere is linked to the increase of population and what we're doing. So if you look at this graph, and I know it's small, but don't worry, I will read the numbers. So if we look, in 1945 on Earth, we had 2.3 billion people. In 2022, 7.75 billion. That's an increase of about 5 billion people. And what we're projecting is between 2022 and 2050 is by 2050 we'll have 9 billion. So basically, we went from 1945 with 2.3 billion people on Earth to 2050, 9.1 billion on Earth. So it raised a lot of questions. Is if we continue to this rate, while the CO2 emissions are going to be incredibly high because we're generating the CO2. The other big question is how are we going to feed those people? Those people who were there last night heard me. Currently, the water we have on Earth, I'm not talking about the ocean, I'm talking about the water that we can use to drink. It's 70% of the water we have on Earth goes to feeding people. The United Nations, the Agriculture Department at the United Nations in 2009, they published figures in 2009. They said between 2009 and 2050, there's going to be an increase in population, meaning an increase by 70% of the food need. So I've just told you the water, 70% of the water on Earth goes to agriculture, to feed people, but we estimate that between 2009 and 2050, we'll have an increased need of food by 70%. You make the equation, some people are going to be starving. It's going to be very complicated, and water, I think many people predict, it's going to become the biggest issue on Earth, and we can all imagine that viticulture, is not going to be the main issue. We're going to keep water to feed people and to give them water to survive. I think we all saw what happened in South Africa in 2018, 2019. I just came back from Austria with the top researcher at Geisenheim, University of Barcelona, and one of them was saying he was there in 2018 in South Africa when in Cape Town there were no more water. The level were so low that people in the town had a limited amount of water they could drink. It could use to drink per day, and they told people who were growing cereal to feed the people to stop irrigating their land. That's just a glimpse of what we're likely to see in many, many, many parts of the world. So if we want to survive in the wine industry, we need to start finding some serious solution for the vine to be adapted to drought in some areas and survive with no or very little water. And in Canada, we're privileged. Drought is not so much of a problem yet, but I can tell you, I live in Quebec, and in the Eastern Township now, we have a lack of water. the residents, now they limit where you can buy land or where you can build a house because there's a shortage of water. That's in Quebec. So sometimes the problem feels very far away, but I think if we look at what other peoples are going through, it's a good idea of what's likely to come our way. And we need to get prepared now. The other graph shows the CO2 emission. I'm always amazed that in 2023, we still have people who are skeptical about climate change. People say, yes, but we had some periods of ice age, and it was, you know, in the Middle Age, it was really, really hot. My answer to this, yes, but we've never had such elevated CO2 in the atmosphere in history. And it comes a point where there's a point of no return, right? So right now, those figures came from the National Climate Data Center, and that comes from 2019. The CO2 emission was at 415. And if we continue to this rate, meaning we don't manage to reduce what we're doing, and we all know we're quite behind already, even though we're trying to make effort. I'm gonna go back here. So we're at 415. If we don't do anything, or very little, and we continue at the rate speed of the increase of the CO2 we've had since the Second World War, we're going to be in a situation that in 40 years from now, will be above 600 in the atmosphere. At that level, there's a point of no return. It doesn't matter what you do. It's just, at that point, it's too late. And most scientists will tell you that if you get there, it's going to be impossible for plants and a lot of humans to survive. And unfortunately, we know that the countries who often pollute the less will be the ones suffering the most. I think we've saw Pakistan with the flood, the irrigation, the big flooding. It was very difficult. Again, it's just a glimpse of what's likely to happen more and more. That was taken from my book, and Hervé Quenol, the scientist, actually put that in the book. He wrote the first 2 chapters. And basically, that was taken from the GIEC, so the IPCC. And what they've done, so the first figure shows you this one, okay? It's the heat. So at the very top, you see the period of 1986 to 2005, and the projection of between 2081 and 2100. And that's for drought, and the bottom for water. So you can see clearly from the color that some areas will have definitely extremely hot, lots of drought. We're already seeing that in Australia. People who grow in Australia, they need to irrigate right now, but the water is actually expensive. I was talking to a producer lately. She was saying to me that the average price per hectare in terms of cost per water to irrigate, and she irrigates very little, it has $3,500 per hectare to irrigate. Again, that's a glimpse of what's likely to come in many parts of the world. So we see that the projections, for sure, it's going to be some areas heavily affected by drought, fires, obviously. And at the bottom, there are some areas that are likely to see more flooding, more rain. Right? And the problem also with the rain pattern is that you might get the rain, but not the rain at the right time. I just came back from Europe for many conferences there on climate change, and all the Europeans, Austria was in a better place because they just had water, but already Italy, France, Spain, they're all panicking. There's no water in the ground. They had no water in the winter. As growers, you know that you want the water in the winter. You want your soil to stock on water. Right now, they just did not get it. They're already in a period of drought, and we're in April. And this, when you talk to scientists, nobody knows, obviously, what's really going to happen. We're making projections because we don't know how much CO2 emissions we'll be able to reduce. But those image is actually an amalgamation. It's kind of a resume. They've put together research from scientists from 50 different research centers and put them all together. And they realized that they all had the same projections, right? There was small nuances, but overall it was the same. So again, you can see that they're very similar to the image we just saw. Some periods are going to be, some areas are going to have dry, hot, and other areas with heavily affected by flood and rains. So we have two things, and all of us have a play. I know sometimes you can feel like it's a drop of water, but if we all feel like that, it's just never going to happen. So we all have a role to play. If you're sommelier, you're the one selling the wine to the consumer. You're communicating that information. You're helping them to make a sustainable choice. The grower has another responsibility, but all of us in the wine industry has a responsibility to mitigate. Mitigate means reducing your CO2 emission. How can we do that? That's the first thing. And the other thing is, how can we adapt so that we can be sustainable and sustainable for the generations to come? So it's not easy, right? There's a lot of, and as human, we like to have a quick solution. We like when it's black and white because it's very comforting. There's no black and white, right? I think it's a lot of the dilemmas along the way. If you want to have a picture perfect, you will wait all of your life because there's always dilemma involved when you get on that road. But if you take a step further, every step will make a difference, and you might make mistake along the way, but at least you're in action and you're part of the solution. So Debbie Inglis will talk a lot today about the solutions, how specifically for the cool climate. Obviously, we're in Nova Scotia, so Debbie will really focus today on how to adapt in the vineyard, in the winery, in a climate like Nova Scotia. So that will be our focus. I will be, at the end, we're going to have a panel where we'll talk about packaging. It's a big part of the CO2 emissions. So before, I want to put some slides to give you an idea of the CO2 emissions per packaging. So when we get to the panel at the end, you'll have an idea on this. And then we'll talk about the role of communication as well. And we'll start with a panel talking about what's the future like in Nova Scotia? What can we do? What does it mean for grapes and style in Nova Scotia? And this is a graph. I could have put pretty much any wine region. It also comes from my book. It could have put any graphs from any wine region, and even though the months will be slightly different, it's the same situation for everyone, more or less. So this is taking from Riesling in Alsace. So what's happened from 1950 till 2019 in terms of harvest, veraison, flowering, and when the bud comes out, right? And if I had any wine region, it would be very similar, but just slightly different dates. But everyone is experiencing a compressed growing season, right? And your buds are coming early. If you're in a region like Nova Scotia or Quebec or Ontario, that means, or France, Burgundy, the Rhone Valley now is suffering from frost, right? So it gets warm, and then the bud comes out, and then you have frost right behind it. You lose your crop. So that's a challenge. Then we're seeing everything gets earlier and earlier, and we're harvesting early as well. So, now in Europe, they're harvesting in August. So that's also very challenging. You don't really have the slow ripening process that you're hoping to have. So again, this is just, and there's a lot of numbers, don't worry if you're far. What it says here, it's taking from the Loire Valley. But it doesn't matter, and as an example, it doesn't matter where you are in the Loire Valley, what we see everywhere, and that could, again, I could have that for Australia, New Zealand, overall, same thing is happening, is we see sugar going up, alcohol going up, and acidity going down. If you're in the Loire Valley, in Nova Scotia and Quebec, it's okay, because you're maybe getting a few degrees in alcohol and some Pinot Noir riper in Nova Scotia. But if you're in Australia, getting pH at 4, it's becoming very, very challenging. And people always talk about, okay, right now, most wine regions are between 50 parallel north and south. And we're saying, well, will it go? Will we see wine regions more north, more south? Will they benefit, right? Again, it's complicated. You saw this year Nova Scotia was extremely hard for the growers. A lot of people lost everything or high percentage because of the cold vortex. So it doesn't mean because you're a cool region that you're going to benefit from climate change. It's chaos. It's not it's climate change, but it's also climatic chaos. So you're having extreme, and that doesn't matter where you are in the world. It's the same. We saw the flooding in Hawke's Bay this year. I was talking to a friend of mine who just finished harvesting in Australia. Last year they had fire. This year was raining throughout harvest. So there's not a set pattern, right? So everyone is suffering, even Nova Scotia and Quebec, which is not necessarily benefiting from climate change. And I just want to show this, and again, I know it's small, but you see this chart a lot. This chart was done by someone I actually admire a lot. It's Dr. Gregory Jones. When I started to do some research on climate change in 2005, he was one of the first person that I reached out to, and he really helped me throughout the years, and he spoke at one of my conference. But this graph of his that we see often is no longer accurate. What we see here is the growth temperature suited for different grapes. In the past, before you would plant, you would look at some climate classification, Huglin, Winkler, and say, okay, based on the growing days, what makes the most sense for the grape where I'm at? The problem with this, if you look at this chart, according to this chart, Pinot Noir would not be possible anymore currently in Burgundy. It would already be too hot, according to this chart. Because this chart was not based on climate change. They did not consider the plant's ability to adapt to climate change. We see in Central Otago for a while that the Pinot Noir has naturally a thicker skin to adapt to the high UV, for example, right? There's some research at Gazanheim being done right now on how the plant can adapt under those extreme conditions. Also, did not take into account how the plants react under high elevated CO2. Again, at Geisenheim right now, there's a research center that's amazing, and they have plants, Cabernet Sauvignon, Riesling, under elevated CO2 to see how the plant is reacting. What they're finding, for example, is that they become more susceptible to fungal disease because the stomata are more open. This is just one thing. So to say, we're going to have to change the grapes right away because it's no longer possible, I think we have to look carefully at everything that can be done to assist the plant to adapt before we just start. And of course, some of the places, they will have for sure to change. I was in Alsace in March, visiting them in Weinbach. And on the Grand Cru Schlossberg, this is a top site, which is the best site for Riesling. On the high part, they're on bedrocks, and they have ripped out, just for experiment, they have ripped out some Riesling and planted Grenache and Syrah to see how it's doing, right? Looking forward, say, we're not going to rip out all our Grand Cru Riesling, it's top sites, we're still making fantastic Riesling, but we'll start experimenting to see what happens so that, slowly, if needed, we can adapt. And those who were there last night, I gave those numbers, but currently there are 6,000 grapes. The OIV, right, stipulates that we have 6,000 grapes, yet 13 of them cover 1/3 of the world's vineyard, and 33 covers half of the world's vineyard. So it's a good news because it means that we have grapes out there that we did not plant for many reasons, or we used to have them, we stopped planting them because, for example, they were not ripening anymore. The Torres family in Catalonia, they actually did a call out. They knew that at some point in Catalonia, there were all of those grapes that disappeared. So they reached out to all the growers and say, if you find a plant you don't know what it is, we'll come to you and we'll analyze the plant to find what it is. And so they have, if you go there, and I've spent a lot of time with the Torres family, they have a vineyard that's amazing for the wine geek. They have about 200 different grapes planted. And you can see all of those grapes that they brought back. Some of them didn't work, but others, like Forcada, they're finding that Forcada is a grape that was there in the Middle Age and stopped planting because it was not ripening anymore when it got cool. Well, today, it shines in the Penedès. They harvest Forcada a month later than Chardonnay. This is just one of the examples. And 6,000 grapes doesn't even look at all of the clones, because currently we're doing a lot of research on the clones. We found so far 1,000 clones of Pinot Noir, 500 of Grenache, and so on. So the opportunities to explore are incredible. And that is why sometimes I'm a bit skeptical when we talk about all the money being spent right now for the development of hybrids. When we first started to look at hybrids, it was to solve mostly one problem, a solution for one problem, right? So we have them a lot in Nova Scotia, in Quebec, in Ontario, of course, because we have cold winter, and one of the main reasons is we wanted like vines that could survive the winter. The recently developed hybrids that they're developing in the research center in Montpellier, at INRA, in Switzerland, in Germany, it's what we call polygenic, meaning that they're crossing a Vitis vinifera with another, like, for example, an American vine or a Japanese vine. So they're doing a cross, but then they will do multiple cross so that they keep more flavors, if you want, of the Vitis vinifera, while you're also giving that plant a way to resist to multiple things. In that case, multiple diseases, right? Like fungal diseases. So we call them polygenic because the plants are created to resist not to one thing, but multiple things. So a lot of it's controversial. I think research is necessary, and I think we need to be open-minded, because right now one of the problems that we have all over the world with climate change is increase of fungal diseases, even in places where they never saw it before. 2 years ago, some producer in the Penedès lost almost 80% of the production to fungal diseases, where they never had this before. So fungal diseases are an increased problem everywhere. And so people are saying, if we don't want to spray as much, maybe those peewee that we call those newly developed hybrids could be the solution. The only problem with that, as you saw with COVID, disease mutate really quickly. And so you're creating a plant to resist to something today while things are changing rapidly, and also the plant can lose resistance over time. And I've had a lot of discussion with producers. There's one producer in South Tyrol, Morandel, who've pretty much based entire production on peewee. They're really cool. They were at my last conference, and and I asked them, I said, are you finding after 20 years that you're starting to spray again more regularly? They said, absolutely. Over the years, we see the plant losing their resistance, and we need to start spraying again. So again, I'm not saying hybrids or newly developed hybrids are not the way to go, but I just think we have to be careful in putting all of the eggs, putting all of your eggs in the same basket. I think you need to look at multiple solutions and maybe look at all the things that you can do rather than just putting everything on one thing. In terms of in the vineyards, for sure, we could have a whole day just on soil management. It's something that I'm extremely passionate about. Soil management, if you manage your soil properly, you have cover crops, your soil retain better the water, you have less erosion, you have more mycorrhiza. The mycorrhiza means that the mycorrhiza gives the water to the plant. You also have more biodiversity, so, and you also capture more carbon in the soil. So soil management is so important. So there's a lot of people now looking at ways to have cover crops, even in areas that it's more difficult, and it's drier. And a lot of people are going back to the traditional methods, trying to, yes, less CO2, so going back to manual labor, horse. But the lucky thing is if you have a lot of hectares and you don't have a horse or manual labor, because manual labor is becoming very difficult, there's lots of technology now that you can use. So there's new tractors that are light, that they won't compact your soil. They also have solar panel on them. So there's a lot of different things that, so this is a producer I love in Switzerland, Marie-Thérèse Chapaz, really, really famous, tiny, but she does everything by hand. We often told that if you have steep vineyards, not using chemical is difficult. Well, she's doing it. There's no chemical, she does it. It's more work, but it's possible. And if you are growers, check what's happening in technology. This is kind of the Tesla of the tractors. There's a waiting list to be on it with Monarch. But if you go to their website, it's incredible what a tractor can do. You have solar panel. It also can take pictures of your vine to kind of read the water's need, the disease. So it's a lot more than just a tractor. So, you know, if you're a grower, just get out there and look at what's coming out in terms of technology. Of course, you won't throw out your tractor to mow a fuel, but when it's time, and they're trying to make them more and more affordable as well. So there's a lot of solution out there without using fuel that are worth exploring. And I'm gonna pass quickly to this because I know that Debbie will talk about this, but I also say that we tend to judge and say, okay, these people are conventional, these people are organic, and say they're good, we're bad. If we go forward like that, we're not going to get anywhere. Maybe your neighbor is using chemicals because it doesn't know how to not use it. So why not have a conversation with that person? And maybe at the end of the conversation, they might go from 5 chemicals to 3, but they reduce 2. And maybe they know that they can do it. They might eventually stop doing it altogether. But I really think we tend to surround ourselves with people who think like us. It's comforting. But we really need to have the discussion with someone who doesn't think like us so that we can actually evolve and inspire the other, right? So, and try to think of what makes the most sense for you. I see producer right now in Quebec, for example, it rains a lot. Last year we had a lot of rain, and they did 18 to 20 with copper and, in the soil. And so is it the right solution, or me being sustainable is more appropriate for that person, right? So I think you also have to look at what makes the most sense for you, for your value, for the environment. But talk to your neighbor, talk to what they're doing, and try to have an open discussion with them. And collaboration, learning. If you have a problem today, another producer, another country has probably had that problem before you. This doesn't pertain to Nova Scotia, but those are the serpias in Jerez, in the south of Spain. They have drought, so what they do in the winter, they dig holes so that the water can really stay in the soil, and comes the spring, they even out the soil, and so that the roots have access to water. We can learn from that. Someone else in Australia, in other parts, could adapt something like this, or like Greece, who's using a very specific way to shape their vine to resist to the drought. I was in Austria last week. We don't think of them as warm climate, but some producers were saying our Riesling is really suffering from sunburn, and we try to put bentonites on the grapes to protect the grapes from bentonite, from sunburn. And I said, have you talked to producers in Australia? They're putting kaolin, right? A kind of a sunscreen for grapes to protect against the sunburn. Again, they said no. I said, okay, well, I'll put you in touch with someone who can help you. So again, having that conversation, reaching out to producers from other parts of the world who can help you. They've probably seen that problem before, right? So Debbie will talk about different solutions. It's not so much of a problem here in Nova Scotia with the higher pH, but in a lot of parts of the world, when we have a higher pH and you want to use less sulfur, it really brings some microbial stability challenge. You're in a good position in Nova Scotia? Not a problem. Acidity decreasing? Well, it's not a problem for Nova Scotia. Alcohol level rising? Not a problem. So we'll talk about that today. Is Nova Scotia, even though it's not always easy, pretty good, in a pretty good situation in comparison to other parts of the world. We're dealing already with all of the issue, and it's really difficult for them. You don't have that problem. I just want to talk to the producer out there. This is something I feel very passionate about. Currently, if you do your CO2 emission calculation to know where you're at, they don't calculate the CO2 emissions coming from your fermentation. To me, that's a big problem. And we have the ability as a producer to capture that CO2 and do something with it, either to store it, to reuse it later on, or to transform it. There are some, and we often think, oh, you know, big producer can do it. There are ways that what I'm told, not that complicated, that can be done. Smith-Lafitte does it in Bordeaux. Montrose does it as well. But basically what they do is they transform it in bicarbonate de soude. I'm trying to look for the English word. Baking soda, thank you. And I think if the wine industry gather with the beer industry, with the spirit industry, and we all do this together, I think it's quite amazing. I think we have to get on that. We're not quick enough on that. Theresa is doing a lot of study right now on this, but that's something we can easily do. Water management, I think you need to look at the water in the winery, right? Managing your water, your gray water. 2 liters of water per liter of wine produced that we use. Yes, it's not as much as the almond and other type of crops, but there's always going to be someone worse than us. It's not the way to look at things, right? What is it that we're using and how can we change that? So if you need help to manage your water in the winery, there are companies out there that can come and help you with that and give you some advice. If you need to be in touch with those companies, I can certainly do that for you. And then I just want to end on this, because at the end, we're going to have panels talking about packaging, transportation. The numbers are small, but I will tell you exactly, it's really simple. Up to 40% of the packaging, the CO2 emission of a wine comes from packaging. So as a winery, as a sommelier, anyone in the wine industry, if you want to make a change, say no to that heavy bottle. There's no reasons in 2023 to have 1 kilo heavy bottle. Unless you have a glass shortage. Right now, with the war in Ukraine, it's difficult. Otherwise, there's not really a need, right? Or an excuse. Transportation is up to 13%. And then the rest is spread between the vineyard and the winery. But the big thing here is packaging. That image was done in 2011 by California wine growing region, but the same thing has been done by other regions in Bordeaux, in Champagne, and they've come with the same thing. So it hasn't really changed. This is still very, very relevant today. And of course, it varies from producer to producer, but that's in average what it's like. And transportation, if you're sommelier out there and you import wine or you list a wine in a wine store, be open-minded to the type of container. It's linked to the transportation. If you look at the transportation, on the right inside, you have the kilogram of CO2 per liter for different type of transportation. What we see is that the kilogram of CO2 per liter is higher if I send my wine in another country in bottle, in a dry container. If I isolate that container but still send in bottle, it's the same CO2 emission. If I send that in a refrigerated container, CO2 emission higher. The lowest are the last two, which means shipping in bulk and bottling when we arrive on site. I'm just saying that because, of course, we're celebrating Nova Scotia producers, but you also drink wine from elsewhere. We have people from Bishop Cellar, you have sommeliers buying wines from wines coming from different origin. Currently, in Sweden, 52% of the wines sold are in bag-in-box, and those are quality wine. A lot of it is shipped in large container, bottled on site. Germany, England, two huge centers of bottling on site. People, the producers from Australia, they ship the wines there, they bottle, distribute. So bottling on site is the way of the future for large volume wines. And we really need to ask yourself, do we need every single wine being put in a bottle? The 99% of the wines that are consumed, 99% of the wine purchased are consumed within the first week of purchase. So that beautiful wine that you're going to age and drink 10 or 15 years on the road represents a very, very small percentage of your purchase. So that good wine you're buying at $20, $25 that you're buying now, do we need to put all of those volume wine in a glass bottle? Maybe we can look at alternative packaging, and you can see on the screen the different CO2 emissions, right? Aluminum can. Thank you, Nova Scotia. You've done an amazing job. A lot of you have put some Tidal Bay. Lightfoot has. Benjamin Bridge has. Amazing. Lower carbon footprint. Single serve. Brilliant. The best solution, of course, will be if we could use a glass bottle and reuse it. Right? Wash it, reuse it. At the end of the day, the bag-in-box does have a bit of a problem, is that the pouch is not recyclable. Even though you have 75 grams of CO2 emissions, you have just 1 gram more with the bottle, but if you can reuse it, then it's the winner. The problem is, in the world, we know we have a lot of different type of bottles. So how do we manage that? There are some people working with the lobbying right now at the European level, trying to change that, trying to have rules so that people have to use, if you have high volume wines, that you should try to use the same, only 4 or 5 type of bottles so that it makes it easier. We're not there yet. There are some wine regions who have taken the lead. Styria in Austria, they have a single unique bottle so that all the producers of the area have decided to use only 3 or 4 types of bottle, and they work with the consumer, they work with the restaurants to return that bottle, wash it. Nova Scotia, you can do it. They're doing it, they just started to do it in Bordeaux. There's a project in Bordeaux, and Taiwan and Catalonia that Theresa is involved. So you can do it on the regional level, especially when you have a wine producing region. We're going to talk about alternative packaging at the end of the day. And then I just want to finish with cork, right? We're going to talk about today about label on the panel. So yes, the container, but also what you use for label, what you use for cork. I don't know why there's always an impression that cork is bad for the environment, where it's the complete opposite. So it takes about 25 years to harvest cork from a tree. Once you harvest that cork, you increase the ability of that tree to capture CO2 by 5 every time you harvest that cork. So any cork producing producer, they are carbon negative, right? And that cork is recyclable, biodegradable. And if you recycle it, you can transform it into bags, shoes, wall, floors, and so on. So cork is actually good. And the cork company have seen a big return in the use of cork versus screw cap for that reason. The screw cap takes more energy and water to produce. And even though it's recyclable, most people put it in the garbage and it ends up in the landfill. We're going to finish the day with communication, so the role we all have. A lot of sommelier in the room, so really important role that you have. And we're going to discuss at the end how to engage consumer, and those two graphs are pretty much the same. And what they mean, there were different research done by different companies, but they all came to the same conclusion. This research specifically was done by Wine Intelligence in US drinker, but they did another one with Canada, Sweden, England, and they came to the same result. So basically they asked people, if you knew that your wine was sustainable, would you be willing to pay more? The baby boomer, and I'm sorry, in general, they're willing to pay a bit less. In the environment, it's something that maybe is not so much of the generation. But the millennials, the younger, they're all willing to pay more. So the millennials, in average, they are willing to pay $5 more per bottle if they knew it was sustainable. The encouraging things, though, is across all age group, all research that have been done said everyone is willing to pay up to $3 more per bottle if they know it's sustainable. We're going to end the day with a panel that will discuss how can we engage with those consumers. As you know, we're losing the young consumer to spirit, ready to drink, beer, while wine has everything that we have that they want. It's made from grapes. There's no sugar added. It's a simple process. There's a lot of sustainable value that they are seeking. So how can we engage with those young consumers? And we'll talk about that today. So I want to finish on that. I hope that you remember at the end of the day that every step counts, right? Everything you do matters. We have a message. Every bottle that's being sold to consumer is a chance to talk about sustainability. That's huge. And after that, they might make a change for the clothes purchase, for everything they do, for what they eat, for buying locally. So every time that we engage with a consumer with a bottle of wine, it's a way to talk about sustainability. So thank you very much. I will let the stage to Debbie. I will just set up the PowerPoint for her, and I will introduce Debbie in a second. So I could not be more happy and honored to have Debbie Inglis here. So for wine growers and wine producers in Canada, Debbie is very, very well known. Debbie, she got her PhD from McMaster University in biochemistry in 1995. And she joined the Brock in 1999 as an assistant professor in the Department of Biological Sciences, teaching in the Oenology and Viticulture program. She took on the directorship of the Cool Climate Oenology and Viticulture Institute, known as COVI, in 2008, where she resides today. She now holds the title of full professor. Debbie's research program first focused on issues of ice wine fermentation, yeast isolation, and stress responses, but has expanded over the years to other red and white wine styles, along with biochemical issues in grapevine cold hardiness, and more recently, diagnostic for grapevine diseases. So of all the people, she knows firsthand the issues that face the wine industry today, especially with climate change, and that's a big part of her role, is to work with producers to help them face everything that we have. So it was quite timely that, considering what Nova Scotia has just experienced this year, that Debbie would come and talk about her knowledge to share with the growers in Nova Scotia. Debbie, thank you so much for being here. Welcome, Debbie.
Thank you, Michelle, for that introduction. Can you hear me okay in the back there? Okay, great. It's always a pleasure to come back to Nova Scotia, beautiful Nova Scotia. I was just thrilled when Michelle invited me to be here. It's been great to come back and connect with people I haven't seen in quite a few years. And I'm also so thrilled to see some of my former students, Rachel and Gina Haverstock, I just saw in the audience today as well. So great to be here. When I was speaking with Michelle about what to talk about today, knowing that Nova Scotia was just hit with some really damaging temperatures this past February, I thought maybe I could share some resiliency strategies that we've been working on in Ontario, where I'm from. And maybe some of these strategies will be applicable here in Nova Scotia. So that's what I'm going to focus in on here today. What I can start by saying is, just the industry here across Canada in grape and wine, is a really economically important industry for Canada. It's worth over $12 billion. Now, the latest report that was just put out last July. And, it creates many jobs in various aspects of the industry, not just agriculture, but that moves over into sales, into restaurant as well. So it's a real important agricultural economic driver for Canada. So, we have been producing wine for over 200 years in Canada. It supports more than 45,000 jobs across the country, and we have grapes planted on over 31,000 acres. But we're not without our challenges, and these challenges are largely driven right now by erratic weather events. So we have challenges with extreme temperature during the growing season. This is a picture, I don't know if you can see it very well, but it was Riesling from my own vineyard that was suffering from heat stress. The berries were actually baking within the cluster. This was just a few years ago. I don't do leaf removal and never did in my own vineyard. I should have mentioned I'm a grower myself. So, this was something very odd to see, walking through the vineyard, this type of heat stress. We've got cold weather events that, are causing winter injury. And unfortunately, that was experienced here in Nova Scotia just this past winter. We can have lack of rain certain years and drought stress, but then it just seems the following year we get excessive rain and problems that result from that. And then maybe the year after, it's something in between, and we seem to go through these cycles. Just the extreme in the weather, there's just no consistency anymore, it appears. These challenges are also bringing new disease pressures with them. And some of these diseases have been around for a long, long time, but we're just not controlling them the same way as we used to. We've got virus infections, that are really showing a lot more recently. This is largely because insect vectors that we used to be able to control in the past, they're overwintering and able to spread these viruses from plants. When those plants get infected and then we propagate new plants from those infected plants, we're spreading the virus even further when we do new plantings. Black rot and sour rot, they've always been around, but what we're doing out in the vineyard and climate change, we're just not controlling them as well as we used to in the past. And so these are not necessarily new diseases, but they're just showing up more often. It doesn't end there. We've got insect pressures, great berry moth as an example. Now it seems they're going through 4 life stages during the course of the growing season. It used to be 3. Now, because of climate change and warming temperatures, there's often a 4th generation that occurs just before harvest, and there's not much we can do for that. Japanese beetles are overwintering better in the soils and then feeding on the leaf tissue. If we don't have a good canopy in the vineyard, we can't capture the energy from the sun and convert that sun energy into sugars in the grape and further ripening the grapes and developing flavors. Asian lady beetle, that came into Ontario about 20 years ago, and it hasn't left. It's something that we have to deal with each and every year. Normally we think of ladybugs as a positive thing. They eat other insects. That could be a positive thing. But when they get into the vines just before harvest and get processed with the fruit, they can release unwanted flavors into the wine, and that can taint the wine and take away from the quality. There's emerging insects. It's not just the ones we have already. The brown marmorated stink bug. Fortunately, in Ontario, it's there, but it's not going into vineyards yet, as in some other regions in the United States. The spotted winged Drosophila, that can pierce fruit. It's an issue in British Columbia. We're not seeing it in Ontario, but is it on its way? This is the new insect everybody's monitoring for, the spotted lanternfly. And this could be devastating to the plant. We have big monitoring programs on way in my province right now, and I'm sure in many provinces across the country looking for this. Amidst all these challenges, we also have the challenge that the consumer wants consistent product each and every year. They're not so interested in vintage variation that some of us might be interested in terms of how that can impact the flavor of the wine. They want consistency each and every year. And in Canada here, overall, we can compete with foreign imports, and we don't own our market share. Globally, or not globally, but across Canada nationally, domestic product only represents about 30% of wine sold. That means 70% of the time, consumers are choosing foreign import. What if we could just change that by 10% or 20%? Even get to 50% of the time, consumers are changing or choosing our domestic product. So this was all the bad part of the story. Is it all doom and gloom? Well, I'm the eternal optimist, and I say absolutely not. It's not all doom and gloom. Challenge means opportunity. It means we can be strategic, we can be innovative, we can think outside the box. So let's get innovative together. We've done it before, we can do it again. If you can grow grapes in Canada, you can grow grapes anywhere in the world, because we have already had to deal with so many challenges, and we have to be innovative to stay competitive. We compete on quality, not on price. And so we have to be able to enhance that quality time and time again. So when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. When Mother Nature gives you winter, we fight back with innovation. One of the positive things of winter that really put Canada on the world wine map is ice wine. We tasted some incredible ice wine last night. It was a 2021 Riesling ice wine. Great expression of what we can do. But there's another side of winter that we're dealing with, and this is winter injury from extreme cold temperature events. And grapevine cold hardiness is still a top priority next to virus infection in grapevines on the priority list of research for Canada. So we have a lot of work that's been ongoing across Canada, understanding grapevine cold hardiness, what we can do to help enhance the hardiness of a plant so that it really expresses its best genetic potential as possible. But there are upper limits to that we also have to deal with. Vitis vinifera wine grapes on the large scale are not particularly cold hardy. Minus 22 degrees Celsius, we're going to start to see some damage. Minus 25, we're at the risk of vine death. And unfortunately, in Nova Scotia this year, they experienced some temperatures in this range. We had the same problem last January in Ontario. We had devastating temperatures in January. Our crop was down by 50% last year. So it's something that we still have to manage, we have to try to mitigate, and we have to plan for, because it's going to happen to us in the future, especially even though we're undergoing global warming. The winters maybe on average are warmer, but peppered within that are these cold weather events. And the warmer temperatures don't allow the grapevines to reach their maximum hardiness. And so a warmer temperature with then a 1 or 2 day cold weather event is worse for the vines, as opposed to a cooler temperature that just stays cooler all the way through the winter. So this is still a national priority, cold hardiness for Canada. And there are researchers right here in Nova Scotia from Ag Canada, so Dr. Deb Moreau and Harrison Wright, as well as Perennia, that are able to work with you and your grower community and wine community to help look at ways to overcome some of the challenges from this. These researchers are networked in a larger research network, not only across Canada, in Ontario, in Quebec, as well as British Columbia, but also across the United States. We have a cold hardiness network that we're plugged into. And we also collaborate with researchers in other parts of the world as well. So there's a vast resource to be able to tap into to help with these issues. We're seeing more weather extremes and greater fluctuations in temperature. And like I say, this is the worst combination when we have a warmer temperature and then all of a sudden experience this cold drop in temperature, because the vines just haven't acclimated and they're not able to fight off the impact of that cold weather event to the same degree. We're also experiencing more and more unexpected spring frosts. So vines are breaking bud a little bit earlier than they should, and then we get a spring frost. And if we don't have ways to warm up that air around the vine, the spring frost can kill the buds or the emerging shoots that are coming out. And this all puts our vines at greater risk. So there's the direct type of cold winter injury that we can see. We can see the damage on the buds or on the green tissue that's emerging. But don't forget, there's also the indirect or silent killers. This is when there's damage on the vascular tissue within the cane or within the trunk, into the xylem and the phloem. That damage is much more difficult to see. You just can't see it by looking at the vine. You have to wait throughout the season and see if the vine is going to collapse a little bit later on come the summer, because nutrients can't flow through that vascular tissue and allow the vine to, or the shoots to continue to grow. We can also get things like trunk injury, where the trunk actually splits open. And then this can be an opportunistic time for bacteria to get into the vine and cause a disease called crown gall. It's like a cancer in the vine, and it will eventually reduce the productivity of the vine and the quality of the fruit. So I just want to show you some pictures here, not so great pictures, but winter damage is not always going to kill the entire block. We can have sections where the vines look fairly healthy, and then we can have sections where the buds have been damaged, possibly the trunk has been damaged. What's causing those differences within a vineyard block? It could be that we've got little micro regions that experience different temperature, but it could also be the health state of the vine. We know now that virus infection in vines takes away from the cold hardiness of the vine. So if you've got a virus-infected vine next to a non-infected vine, likely that virus-infected vine is going to experience more damage. This is a picture showing a trunk split within the vine. Unfortunately, that trunk is not going to survive. It has to be cut out, and hopefully there'll be a renewal sucker that comes up. Grapevines can withstand a certain level of damage to the trunk and still be viable. So trunk damage is cumulative over the years. And so I'm going to share a strategy that we have with multiple trunks that we're using now, so that if the damage accumulates too much in one trunk, hopefully it's less in a second trunk, and you don't have to wait 2 or 3 years for a renewal sucker to come up to be able to continue to crop from that vine. Unfortunately, this is a picture of a bud that just started to emerge and then got hit by a spring frost. And so you can see that bud tissue is now turned brown. Here's a shoot that started to grow, and then spring frost hit in, and we can see that green tissue starting to curl and dry up. So how do we protect the vines and build resiliency to this threat? So first and foremost, I think Michelle mentioned this earlier, we have an opportunity to be choosing the right variety for the right location. And when there's a damaging event that's hitting an entire block, maybe that's an opportunity to think, is this the right variety for this location? Or knowing what I know now about growing grapes in this region and varieties that are available to me, is it time to think about putting a different variety back into that block? We learned this lesson in Ontario in 2003, and then again in 2005. We got hit with cold temperature in 2003, and 2 years later, 2005 again. Half of our crop was devastated, and it was in each of those cold event years, and it was mainly Vitis vinifera. And so in Ontario, we still have a large proportion, a significant proportion, over 35% of our grape production is still hybrid grapes. And this offers some level of longer-term sustainability from the grower perspective that's supplying these grapes to the winery, because they have to be able to stay in business while they're replanting the blocks that have been hit and waiting for those vines to come back into production. So even in Ontario, where we may not have the same challenges that you have here in Nova Scotia for ripening fruit during the growing season, we still have a significant portion of our grapes that are that are hybrids, to help overcome those issues. And again, as I say, vine loss was an opportunity to rethink about what vines should be replanted in that area. We're going through this process right now in Ontario because of the winter damage of 2022. It was January 2022. Whole blocks were wiped out. I believe this was largely because of the combination of the temperature and virus infection in those blocks. So growers are thinking, what should I be replanting with? This is the time I have to rethink my choices. Do we have a varietal plan yet for Ontario, even Nova Scotia, all of Canada? We don't. It's something we have to work on, and the time to do that is now, so that we're not just guessing what we should be putting back into the ground. We've got a strategy that we're following for that purpose. Second rule, always hill up your vines. Do not become complacent in this. 9 out of 10 years, 8 out of 10 years, you don't have to worry about it. You're not going to have a devastating cold weather event. It's a lot of work. You've got to move that dirt up over the graft union that connects the scion to the rootstock of the vine. And then in the spring, you've got to dehill and move all that dirt back out so that you don't get roots sprouting from the scion that may get infected with phylloxera in the ground. It's a lot of work, but if you don't do it that 1 year when you do get that cold weather event and you have not protected that graft union, you may not have renewal buds that break, and you may not get renewal growth, or suckers we call them, to replace the trunk and still keep that vine alive. That means you would have to replant the vine. A vine will take 4 to 5 years to come into full production. That's a long time to go without any fruit in your operation. So do not get complacent with that hilling. We've had producers in Ontario that moved away from that, and then it just takes one more cold weather event, and you're like, oh, why did we do that? Why did we try to reduce our costs by taking away that viticultural practice? That's not the one to scrimp on. That it's just not the one to take away. I used to have arguments with my husband every year. I want a bigger hill. Make the hill higher. Oh, the hill's fine enough. No, it's not. I want a Paul Bosque hill. Paul Bosque of Chateau de Charme, big producer in our region. They hill up extensively. And, I always knew this was such an important component to make sure you're protecting that graft union. And this, if you can see, are some vines with the hill up over the graft union to provide that layer of soil around the base of the vine to protect those buds. Third component is spare parts pruning, we call it, leaving extras just in case. This is a good strategy, whether you've had a cold weather event that you're aware of or not. We always like to leave extra parts. We can always go back through the growing season and take a little more off. We can't put more back on. Okay, once it's gone, it's gone. So if you know already there's bud damage, leave extra arms with extra buds, okay? And then wait until spring occurs and what you get for bud break. If you've got enough buds and things seem to be fine, you can go back and prune again and cut away those extra buds. But if you need them, they're there, you tie them back down. This is just a routine strategy we've incorporated every year now in Ontario. Train new suckers for new trunks. Again, if you know you've had devastating damage, of course you're going to bring new suckers up. But if you're not sure the level of damage, it's always a good idea to train a new sucker coming up from the base of the vine. This is a picture here. Here's the established trunk for the vine. This is a 1-year-old sucker that had hardened off the year before and in the spring. And then here we've got some new growth coming up. We like to have trunks of different age so that if there's some cumulative damage, in this older trunk, we've got another trunk that we can rely on that's going to break bud and is going to provide fruit to us. Always remember as well, there's a lot of growth going on below the ground. You have to feed the root system with energy that the leaves are going to capture from the sun. And so you need those suckers coming up. If everything is dead up above, you need those suckers coming up from the base. You may only choose 2 of them next year when you're pruning, but during this year of recovery, lots of suckers are required. You've got to train them up. You're going to lose some probably just through your vineyard practices through the year. Tractor might grab one and knock it off. Leave a few extras so you've got enough there to keep that vine alive during the growing season. Next spring, you can choose the best position sucker to become the replacement trunk. How do we prevent cold damage from the first place? What are some of the tools that we have? First and foremost, we have to know how hardy the grapevine buds are. And so we started doing these measurements through a research project years ago in 2010 in Ontario. And we realized, following the hardiness of the buds throughout the winter, this was important information to share with the grower community. They could then, if they could easily tap into that information, they would know how hardy the buds are. And if there was a cold weather event and if you had some tools available to you, you would know when to use those tools to warm up the air around the vine. The program is called Vine Alert. And I'm happy to say after 12 years of developing this program. We've now transferred it back to the industry. They're running it now in Ontario. And we've expanded it to Quebec. So one of my grad students is now a researcher in Quebec, and she's leading the way on this and bringing this technology to the Quebec growers so that they can also follow the hardiness of the buds throughout the growing season. I would love to be able to expand this to Nova Scotia. Your researchers here in Nova Scotia at Ag Canada are already doing these measurements. It would not take much for us to add an additional tab and be able to include the data from Nova Scotia into this web accessible platform so that any grower can just tap in, go to the website and see where the hardiness is. So something we can talk about down the road. Before our industry in Ontario invested in wind machines, because we're lucky enough to have inversion layers of warm air we can mix with cold air around the vines, our industry, these cold weather events weren't so common in the winter, and we were more concerned with spring frost. And our industry was using helicopters to fly over vineyards to mix up the air and warm the air around the young shoots to protect them from cold weather damage. That then led to the thought of, hey, can we make this a little more efficient? Flying helicopters at, $2,000 an hour, okay, maybe you could afford to do it for a couple hours at 5 o'clock in the morning, but you're not going to be able to utilize this as a solution in the middle of winter when you've got 8 or 10 hours of cold weather. So that led us to invest in wind machines. Now, prior to 2002 or 2003, there was only one operation that was Chateau de Charme in Ontario that was using wind machines. When they had crop after the devastation in 2003 in their Vitis vinifera, the industry was still a little bit skeptical. But after we got hit again in 2005 and Chateau de Charme still had crop, everybody invested in wind machines. So this is now part and parcel with your vineyard equipment if you're growing grapes in Ontario, specifically Vitis vinifera grapes that need that protection. Some of our growers have even put these wind machines in their Vidal blocks because they're relying on that Vidal to continue, Vidal is a hybrid, to continue to be productive because a big part of their operation is ice wine production. And so it's not specifically just for Vitis vinifera. But again, we're lucky in Ontario. We've got the inversion layers. We don't have the winds that you have here. I don't think this technology is, really conducible to helping with your issues here. But what else are we using in Ontario in regions that have very cold temperatures and colder than what a wind machine would be able to warm up? And this is the case in Prince Edward County. They're still growing Vitis vinifera, but they get temperatures minus 33, minus 34 degrees Celsius. A wind machine warming up the air, even with an inversion layer by 4 or 5 degrees Celsius, it's still not going to help those vines. So this is where we took our lead from our grower colleagues in Quebec that had already invested and have been using geotextile material. And so by basically blanketing the vines with this geotextile material, it provides a protected layer from that cold temperature. And there are lots of different types of geotextile material to evaluate. There's lots of different ways to lay this over the vines. So this is just one picture of one example. But this is where research can come into play to figure out, what the best strategy is for your area. I think this is a strategy you may want to look into here in Nova Scotia, maybe with your research partners at Ag Canada and Perennia to see if this is applicable. Is it an extra cost? Absolutely, it's an extra cost. You've got labor costs to in addition to material costs, for this. But you've got to balance that out of not having a crop for a year, or having damage that's going to take 2 or 3 years for the vine to recover from, or not having live vines where you have to replace those vines. So it's always a cost comparison and a risk assessment that you have to be looking at as a grower. I just want to share some numbers with you because they're really quite spectacular. We wouldn't have believed this if we hadn't have done the research ourselves. So I know this table is small and you're not going to be able to see it, but I'm just going to walk you through it. These are different months in this column. And then I've got the maximum, minimum, and average temperature. And it's comparing the ambient temperature to the temperature inside the canopy where the geotextile is protecting. Now, in February of 2016, the ambient outside temperature in the vineyard was minus 33.6. That was the coldest it got at this vineyard site in Prince Edward County. But underneath the geotextile, minus 15 degrees Celsius. It's half the temperature, okay? Minus 15, these vines, these are Vitis vinifera vines, they can handle minus 15. The following year in December, later on that year, December of 2016, so the following winter, ambient temperature minus 22, again inside the geotextile minus 15. So we know it's warmer inside the canopy or inside the geotextile. What does that mean in terms of bud viability? Well, my colleague Jim Wilworth that did this work saw that bud viability for the geotextile vines was anywhere between 73 up to 90% bud viability. And these are for varieties of Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Gamay, and Viognier. Further to that, looking at the comparison of burying vines with soil, which is very labor intensive and has issues with burying the vines in soil. You can get breakdown of the cane tissue, rot setting in, crown gall setting in, a lot of work to move that much dirt in the winter and out in the spring. Comparing the number of clusters per vine for the buried vines was only 4 clusters per vine. For the geotextile protected vines, it was 11 clusters per vine. So that's 3 times the amount of clusters per vine. This made this winery operation more viable, okay, to be able to grow these varieties year in and year out. So switching away from all the responsibility just in the vineyard, what can we do in the winery? Given erratic weather events and climate change and the stresses that it's putting on the industry. Well, as I said earlier, Canadian wines, we compete on quality, not on price. So we have to be producing a quality product year in and year out. So sparkling wine has really, been a growth trajectory for consumer wine sales for many years, and it continues to grow. There's lots of interest in Canadian sparkling wine. With sparkling wine grapes, you're harvesting those grapes a little bit earlier in the growing season because you need the high acidity and you don't need very high sugar. You only need enough sugar to get to 10% alcohol in the base wine. Okay, so that's a benefit to regions where our fall weather can be erratic. We can have crazy rains and just terrible weather coming in the fall. So if we've got wine styles that are harvesting the grapes slightly prior to that, that's a benefit. Establishing a traditional sparkling wine program is expensive. It's 3 years for that wine minimum to be released back out to the industry. But what about taking the lead from Prosecco? Making Charmat-style sparkling wines, lighter, fruitier, fun wines that are hitting a different consumer demographic. Is that something to be looked at I know we're looking at that in Ontario, expanding our traditional sparkling wine to Charmat method sparkling wines for that consumer demographic. Rosé wines, again, the style of rosé is changing from what the consumer wants. It's still also a growing trend. Lots of consumers are interested in purchasing rosé wines. But the style is moving to a very light-colored style of rosé, dry rosé wines, not sugar-rich rosé wines, emulating rosés coming out of Provence. We just did a workshop last week at Covey, bringing in a research specialist from Provence to talk to our winery producers about what we can do to improve rosé wine quality and consumer purchase of that wine, seeing it as a growing trend in our region. Again, we've got the right dynamics here. You want some acidity. You want that lively acidity. That's important for the style. You want a nice dry style rosé. This is certainly a wine style that's conducive to this region as well as in Ontario. But in Ontario, our wine producers and consumers were still looking for full-bodied red wines. And we just can't do that each and every year in Ontario, similarly to what the issues are here in Nova Scotia. We just don't have the heat units each and every year to fully ripen red grape varieties to make those bold, rich, full-bodied red wines. So can we take the lead from another wine-producing region around the world? Northern Italy. They make Amarone wines. They do a spectacular job. Why did Amarone wines, ever come to be? Because they couldn't fully ripen the red grape varieties in their cool climate region. And so they harvest those grapes at regular harvest, and they further ripen those grapes in a protected environment. So we said, why can't we do that here in Ontario? And we're not held by the same rules as what producers in Italy are held to. So we investigated many different ways to dry the grapes. We're also not held by the variety that we can use. We were experimenting with Cabernet Franc, but a lot of the producers in Ontario that are making this style wine are using lots of different varieties in this process now. So we compared the traditional barn to dry the grapes to greenhouse. We had lots of open greenhouse space in the fall when we would need to dry the grapes, and so this was a good match. Abandoned tobacco kilns, repurposed tobacco kilns, I should say. Lots of airflow to dry tobacco leaves. This looked like a good way to further dry grapes. And then even investigating a specifically designed drying chamber for grapes for making Appassimento wines. The end result, we've got a lot of producers now in Ontario producing Appassimento wines. And these wines, although in this slide I've got prices, they're old prices. Sorry, I just didn't have a time to update this with 2023 prices. But often these wines are commanding $50 to $75 a bottle. It's high quality, high-end wines. And they're selling these wines. Consumers are demanding these wines. They want these wines, and they want to support a local product of this quality. And one of the last things I'll talk about in terms of winery operations and options available is further extending that local idea, buying local. What about tapping into your local microbial terroir? Okay, what are the natural microbes on the fruit that are being produced in your vineyards? Can you work with that microbial terroir and produce a wine with a unique profile that adds to your story? Now, this isn't just about harvesting grapes and soaking them and just letting the fermentation naturally take off. This is about selecting yeast from your natural microflora, isolating those yeasts, characterizing those yeasts. And we're now in a position, at least in Ontario, where we can work with a company in Guelph that can take that culture and build it up to a large enough biomass in a very short period of time and give that back to the winery. They have to pay for this service so that they can inoculate their wines with their own locally isolated yeast. This gives a little more consistency in that natural product from vintage to vintage. You can store these yeasts at the yeast company. This has been going on for a long time in the brewing industry. We just haven't taken advantage of it in the wine industry. It's difficult, to select your own yeast and just make an active dry preparation like Eelman sells, for their active dry yeast. So this is another avenue to work with a wet culture that's from your own vineyard. I've been doing this for a few years now, characterizing Saccharomyces euvarum yeast that we isolated from a local vineyard. And this yeast has some really unique qualities about it. It produces a lot of really aromatic, fruity and floral esters. It consumes acetic acid. Why is that important in our industry now? Because we have issues some years where we've got higher levels of sour rot in our grapes than we would like. If we have an organism that can convert that bad component into wonderful, flavorful floral and fruity esters and make a really high quality wine out of it, it's a win-win, and it's a local yeast. So I know there are colleagues in Nova Scotia that are working on microbial terroir research out of Mount St. Vincent University, Gavin Kernahan, and out of Ag Canada, Lua Fan. So hopefully you're getting networked with these people and using these resources. So in the big picture, where do we want to be in 2050 so that we're prepared for what these climate challenges are continuing to be and where we're going to be in the future? We need to focus on the grape varieties that will thrive in the future environment. But we just don't know what those varieties are going to be. It's going to require research, and we need to start that work now, okay? There are, as Michelle pointed out, 6,000 Vitis vinifera varieties, or grape varieties known worldwide. There's varieties, but there's also the clones of varieties, and then there's the clone and rootstock interaction that will also impact how those vines grow. We need to start evaluating the vines not only for how they grow and manage the cold weather, but the sensory evaluation and the consumer liking studies. Does the consumer like the wine that results from these new varieties that you may be thinking about for this region? At the end of the day, if the consumer doesn't like them, don't go down that pathway. It may be the hardiest vine out there, but if nobody wants to drink the wine from it, then, it's not going to fit the bill. We need to focus on clean plant material and stop relying on imported plant material or plant material that has virus and other diseases in it. We need to think about the long-term sustainability and becoming more independent overall for an industry. It requires 5 years for a newly planted vine to come into full production. And then people that are evaluating these vines, they're going to need 4 to 5 years to study these vines once they're in production to see if this is going to be the future. So the time to start is now. The time to start was yesterday. But if we haven't, we may have an opportunity this year if certain blocks are getting pulled out. Maybe it's time to start evaluating other varieties. So I strongly believe that the glass is half full. It's not half empty. How do we plan to fill up those glasses completely with Canadian wine? We can do that through partnerships between academia, government, and industry. When we work collectively together as a team, that's how we make those advances in the shortest time possible. It's a very powerful tool. We can be looking at new regions being identified for growing grapes that may be better suited for the future environment. We need to establish that national clean plant program, so whatever vines go into the ground, they're going to have the best shot at performing for you for 25, 35 years to come. The application of science and technology will assist in developing a varietal plan for Canada so that we can work collectively to know what vine choices should be going into the ground. And assessing our adaptive capacity, being prepared for the future. You know, there's issues with cold hardiness and what we can do on that front. To date, I don't think you've been having to deal with drought stress. We didn't have to deal with it in Ontario 20 years ago. And now, I would say every third year, we have drought stress. We have to water the vines. So it's something, even though you may not have these challenges right now, we need to be thinking about what those challenges are going to be and have a strategy in place, learning from other regions around the world and taking the best from those regions. So coupling research with practical application, networking and sharing resources, being proactive, not reactive. The worst is when a disaster hits and you don't know where to start. Let's be proactive. Let's plan for the future so that we continue to have an economically viable industry down the road. We need to develop an extreme weather recovery strategy. You know, thinking about what you're experiencing right now, but also what could come in the future. Do we have the resources? You know, if you have to start irrigating in some way, you know, are you set up for that? Or if we have to start thinking about more drought-tolerant rootstocks, are you evaluating those? Are you thinking about that? Canada can lead the way. You know, we can be the groundbreakers. We've always been an innovative industry because we have to be competitive. We compete on quality, not on price. So to compete on quality, this industry has some of the most innovative minds I've ever come across because we have to be in order to survive and be sustainable in the future. So we can be the resource that the world turns to see what we're doing. We're already doing that with grapevine cold hardiness. We can do that in a number of these additional areas. We just need to work together and put those resources to good use between academia, government, and industry. So with that, I'll be happy to answer questions when the time is right. I'm not sure if we're doing that right now, but I'll let Michelle tell us how we're doing. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Anyone has questions for Debbie? No? I do have questions for you, but I will integrate them in the next panel because I think there's going to be some interesting discussion to be with the next panelist. Thank you so much, Debbie, for your time. The first panel, we are going to talk about how the wine style in Nova Scotia is likely to evolve. We know it won't stay the same. There are changes. So to join me on this panel, this incredible panel, have Michael Lightfoot, of course, from Lightfoot in Wolfville, Melanie Eelman from Beausoleil, and Jean-Benoît from Benjamin Bridge. So thank you so much. I'm going to go right at it. And my first question will be from Michael. We had some discussion over the last week and last night, especially this year. We know that Nova Scotia was heavily hit with a vortex. You both have hybrids and Vitis vinifera in your land. How do you see the planting evolves over the years with Vitis vinifera and hybrids knowing what you have experienced this year and what's best suited for your region.
Thank you. I think I'll rely on the great Lloyd Schmidt, his philosophy on planting a vineyard, which was his advice to me 12 or 13 years ago. Michael, plant the vineyard like you're investing your money for risk. So we're all tech, predominantly. That means 80+% vinifera. We took a sustained hit this year. Luckily, for 12 years, we've dodged many, many bullets. We're in a favorable location to the water, and our vineyards are healthy and resilient. We've been close on many occasions and lost production, but never a hit like this. I don't see, for us, much different moving forward. I think vinifera for us has been easier to manage. As a region, I think that philosophy, given the context of the wine styles that are most popular for the region, I think it's important to remember risk and be resilient for this. As far as us and hybrids, we find that the hybrid material that we've had to access and to use has been laden with disease. It's been propagated, self-propagated off other vineyards, and we're just pushing disease around from place to place. I think that moving forward, we need a lot more research and work to clean up our hybrids for this very purpose. I'm most interested in the new varieties. I'm always got an eye to what's new and exciting coming forward. And I hope to be able to experiment with some newer varieties if we can find clean, virus-free material to work with.
Do you have any specific grapes that you have an eye on?
Nothing specific per se that I would share. There are. I'm not that close. We're kind of in evaluation stage, but there's some exciting things out there that could really fit our region. And given the historic temperatures and growing degree days, we have something now, material, as you say, 6,000 different vines in the world. Without having to look for new ones, we can start to overlay our growing aspects to what we know from those other varietals that we can choose. So we're always have an eye to the future. Certainly white and aromatic would be a general descriptor for me, for my personal preference. I'd like to see Nova Scotia as a whole narrow in a little bit more on their style moving forward. So I think that's proven, no matter if it's Vitis vinifera or hybrids, is white aromatic, I think is a good stamp for us.
And did you see this year when you suffered from that vortex, how did the hybrid fare against the Vitis vinifera in that context?
Quite early to get a real picture, but from what anecdotally I hear everyone else reports and what our team reports is about 50% of death on buds in hybrids and up to maybe 90 or even 100% death in Vitis vinifera.
So it's interesting because it's not a major difference between hybrids and Vitis vinifera.
Yeah, we were surprised that there are varietals that are in our province that are Minnesota type varietals that are been tested to -35. But of course, we know that it was the lead up to the event. It wasn't a proper. These vines weren't acclimated to their deepest state, no matter hybrid or Vitis vinifera. So it really showed us that if we're not acclimated, if those vines aren't deeply asleep enough, it doesn't matter how cold hardy they are, we're going to suffer a huge hit.
And before I go to the next question, and I want to talk to Jean-Benoît, maybe this is a question for the three of you, but Debbie was talking about geotextile as a solution, which I know in Quebec, the arrival of geotextile changed the style of wine tremendously because we now are able to make Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. Is this a solution for Nova Scotia? And I know, Michael, we had some discussion last night, you and I, about that. Why are we not seeing more geotextile, and what do you think about that?
Debbie pointed out, with our windy climate, we don't have inversions, and so it's very difficult to find, a methodology to try to prevent these catastrophic events from happening. And certainly geotextile, as you pointed out, fits the bill. I'm very interested in it. I have my eye on one property not far from here that I'm very anxious to see how it fared out. And I'm praying that it did better than average, and I think that there's a lot to learn within that we should all be looking towards for some of these higher risk varietals that we want to pursue.
Melanie, Jean-Benoît, any thoughts about geotextile?
Yeah, we have some for sale at Benjamin Ridge.
And why? Okay, no, you cannot get away with a comment like this. You need to explain. I actually, from an applied point of view, I don't think that we gathered enough data. In part, due to, I guess, how labor intensive, it would have been to do an experiment on a larger scale, and the labor implications of that. So on that basis, we were not able to use the geotextile, for the reason that we bought it, but yeah, just not enough to form a true opinion on the matter.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely had our eyes open to geotextiles. Just recently, we actually had a supplier come to our site and do a little demonstration of what the fabric looks like, show us the videos of crews putting it on, just to sort of demonstrate how labor intensive it is. Stress how important it is for proper installation, and it seems like, especially after Debbie's presentation, and you look at that bud viability, that cost actually might be worth it in the end, right? If it's you're looking at burying the vines like they do in Prince Edward County, not doing anything like most of us have done here in Nova Scotia. I'm having major regrets that we didn't hill this year. And then looking at applying the geotextile, 0 buds to 4 buds to 11 buds, or 90% of your buds are okay and 50% and none. That's pretty compelling evidence, and I think that in the long run, we might have to start looking at doing at least some test blocks in our vineyards. It might be site specific depending on how windy your site is or how much of a slope it is, but definitely something we need to consider, especially for our Vitis vinifera varieties, which I think we don't give up on in Nova Scotia.
Thank you. I want to talk about sparkling wine. I'm excited about sparkling wine for many reasons. First of all, I think as a Canadian flagship style of wine, it's the only style of wine that you can do well in all producing wine regions in Canada. So what a great way to promote Canadian wine when you go globally, even though every province is very different in style, but you find great sparkling wine in Nova Scotia, Quebec, Ontario, and also British Columbia, and certainly fantastic. Don't tell anyone, but my favorite sparkling wine definitely comes from Nova Scotia. And I always tell people when I travel to Europe, I always put in my luggage sparkling wine from Nova Scotia, and I serve it blind to my friends in France, and they always think it's champagne, and I'm always very proud of it. My question is for you, Jean-Benoît, and you and I you've participated to a lot of my conferences over the years, and we've had a discussion about what Champagne has seen as an evolution of climate. You're kind of seeing that now in Nova Scotia, differently, of course, but you're having a window of maybe what sparkling wine in Nova Scotia is going to evolve to. Can you talk maybe about your view on that and how you think the style of wine of Nova Scotia will evolve?
Absolutely. Can you hear me okay in the back? Yeah? Can you see my sweatpants too? Yes. It's like the table from Beauty and the Beast, the dinner scene. Yeah. Well, in your presentation, Michel, you certainly highlighted some of the markers or some of the metrics of climate change, like traditional byproducts. And one of them was that harvest dates were sooner and sooner. And another one was that the sugar content and actually the grapes reached the desired sugar content earlier in the season, and the metabolization would also be faster. And alongside with those two traits, you did mention that there is much to be gained from a qualitative point of view in this extension of the growing season, because that is a process that in a perfect world, would happen over an extended period of time. And that happens to be one of the climatic kind of blessings, like coming from the proximity of the Bay of Fundy. And so the moderating effect on a site like here is precisely what allows, kind of Nova Scotia sparkling to tap into that combination of low sugar content, unspoiled acidity, and phenolic maturity, and these more kind of substantial qualities that are tied to maybe the themes of concentration and extraction and whatnot. So unquestionably, there's a lot at stake, like knowing that there will be a shrinking of the growing season and potentially harvest dates that are more and more premature. However, also, as you mentioned, so that's referring back to your presentation about our margin of error in Nova Scotia. It is also undeniable in the sense that there is definitely more wiggle room here in terms of our ability to withstand climatic circumstances that will lead to pHs perhaps being a little bit higher. TAs that are lower, as well as alcohol contents or potential alcohol, at a greater level in the fruit material. Now, there's a fundamental difference, I think, between that, which is quantifiable, and like this idea that this could mean something positive. And the reason for that is twofold. Number one is that the needle moves at a planetary level. So as a biosphere, if the needle moves, as one, it would be like, just imagine like the audacity, like to, celebrate, what that would mean for Nova Scotia wine. Like it's beyond arbitrary and just like existentially like unacceptable. Like, because again, like the needle moves as one. And so whether or not we have the ability to welcome additional heat units in our ecosystem, well, so be it, but it's still not good news. And the other reason why it cannot be celebrated is because you cannot pick and choose the byproducts of climate change and say that you're going to isolate only the additional heat units, because we all know, again, going back to your presentation, and actually in this particular case, Debbie's, the distinct possibility of a spring frost is probably more problematic than whatever gain you would expect in terms of richness coming from the growing season down the road. And so the warmer temperatures in February and March now lead to these inevitable Game of Thrones, like social media posts. Like, it looks like a battle scene at night with all the little agricultural fires lit up between the vines, like everyone in the wine industry here today, like all too familiar, I guess, with these scenes. And they are not they are inevitable, they're annual, right? And the question is not if there's going to be a spring frost in Europe, which is kind of looking into a crystal ball that is about 25 years ahead. It's where it's going to hit and what will be the extent. You see these agricultural fires every year.
You're talking about spring frost. What is have you found the most effective way in Nova Scotia? Because it's unusual, you have a lot of wind, right? So the wind machine are there, but they're not doing much because you already have so much wind. Have you found the most effective way to deal with spring frost in Nova Scotia?
Well, I think on 2 or 3 occasions we've lit fires, albeit hay bales at the bottom, strategically placed at the bottom of our hills. We'll also traditionally push the canes out of the vineyard to remove the diseased wood, but we'll leave that material down at the bottom of a vineyard as well to also be lit. Generally, we'll have some beer and light it when all the last threat of frost is gone. So it's kind of serves multiple purposes, that brush pile. But that's what we've done for spring frost. And it will only work, of course, if you think you have an inversion, i.e. it needs to be dead still, generally first thing in the morning. But that's about the only thing that we've done. I know we've been gathering up valerian, which is a biodynamic preparation. We've never had to use it yet. We've never found the right circumstance or the right amount of it to make it viable to use it. But we do have, I think, a significant amount on hand. And that would be the next tool in our toolbox to combat.
Well, obviously, the last devastating climatic event in the Nova Scotia wine history, it was only a few months ago. But prior to that, it was a spring frost. The last and only in recent memory in 2018, June 4th, if I'm not mistaken. And the main difference between the vortex and well, there are many differences, of course. They're completely different climatic events. But in the case of the vortex, the site was a non-factor. It did not matter that you had the most moderated site in Nova Scotia or not, or elevation or proximity to water. In the case of the spring frost of 18, that made a major difference. And one of the the vineyards that fared the best was actually Lightfoot and Wolfville on the account of the proximity of the Minas Basin. So proximity to a the moderating effect of a large body of water was a big factor, and then elevation was another one.
That's a great segue for my question for Melanie. I think Debbie talked a lot about sustainability, and often with sustainability we focus on what it means in the vineyard, but to me sustainability is also being sustainable financially so that you can pay your employee, that everyone can live and you can eat, and it's kind of that side of sustainability we often forget, but to me it is a whole, right? Melanie, you've taken an interesting approach at Beausoleil. We had your beautiful Chardonnay last night. I had a chance to have a sneak preview of your first Pinot Blanc behind the scene, which is really exciting. But I know that you also do other types of wine that are quite creative, that you use other products to embrace sustainability. So when those years are more challenging, you still have those years that are profitable. Can you maybe share a little bit your vision on that?
Yeah, for sure. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Beausoleil, and we're probably the smallest kid in the room and the newest kid in the room.
Can you hear Melanie in the back?
Can you hear?
Perfect.
At Beausoleil, we call ourselves Beausoleil Farmstead or Vineyards. We're a really small lot artisanal winery and cidery. And when we say small lot, we generally produce our wines in 30 cases or less vintage, and are really focused on vintages that are appropriate for year and everything. And we're very, very new. So most of our vineyards were planted in 2019. We're about 30% vinifera on our site, and the remainder is made up of hybrids. And being really, really new and coming to this industry from a little bit of a different background, I think, than a lot of others. I have a PhD in chemistry, fell into the cider world and was a cider maker for a number of years, fell in love with the wine industry in Nova Scotia, and really wanted to branch out on my own and really think about what do we add to the local industry? What are we going to do that's a little bit different? and small lot wine program very much close to my heart. And every year we're doing a little bit more, which is awesome. But what Michelle was sort of talking about is that our unique take on what we're doing is that we're really focusing on this new category that is emerging in North America called viniciders, which are cider and wine blends. And I really feel that this is a category I think that Nova Scotia can do really well sustainably year over year and really excel at, in addition to other things that we really excel at, like our sparkling programs and our vinifera programs when the vintages and the year allows. So the vinicider movement is a little bit of a niche movement that's happening in regions of North America where we're growing apples and grapes side by side. And that is really true of what we're doing here in the Annapolis Valley. You come into the valley and the sign says orchards, vineyards, and tides. And this is really something special. I think that being in the fruit basket of the Maritimes is really something that we're proud of, that apple industry where I think arguably we can say that we grow the best apples in the world in Nova Scotia.
After Quebec, no.
After Quebec. And I think this is a category that Quebec is starting to explore right now as well. And it really starts on the West Coast, and like a lot of things cool, it moves towards the East Coast. And we really consider ourselves Nova Scotia's first vinicidery in addition to a small lot winery. And really it's in response to the fact that beautiful, amazing apple varieties that we have here are not cider apples. They are the dessert apples. So they win on aromatics. They're beautiful, they're juicy, they're delicious. You can throw them at a wall and the kids will still eat them. They maintain their crunchiness, but they don't have that same acidity or that tannin profile that a cider apple has. Now, that's not saying we can't make beautiful ciders from them. We can, and the Nova Scotia cider industry is proving that we make absolutely wonderful ciders from that. But this movement of blending our wines in with it is to really, in a natural way, correct that lack of acidity and that lack of tannin component to create something that is now no longer a cider. It is not quite a wine. Alcohol-wise is very much on trend with that lower alcohol content that people are really looking for without sacrificing complexity and depth and nuance and flavor, without having to rely on a high sugar content to make up for body and mouthfeel because our ciders lack for that tannin component. And so given the types of wines that we're just so well known here within the province, that cool climate, bright, lively acidity that we do so well here, it just works and is a perfectly, I think, natural addition that we can take the two and blend them together and really explore it as a new category that Nova Scotia can excel in. And given, I think, this most recent devastating event that's happened in February for our own program, our wine program next year, we're thankful that 2022 was very kind. It was a beautiful vintage and the tanks are full. We've had to make some decisions following that event about where the program goes and what we need to hold on to make sure that we have a program in the coming fall and vintage. But the sustainability of being able to stretch the wines a little bit farther and still have a program, play around with some of those less desirable hybrid varieties that are probably going to come out a little bit stronger out of this event. Nobody likes Frontenac, but in terms of a variety, super challenging acidity, but works really, really well with the types of apples that we do here. So really, really thankful and grateful that we're going to be able to remain local in Nova Scotia for the coming season, and it will help us move through and be okay. And supporting local only becomes more and more important, I think, as we think about what types of events that we're facing in the future.
Absolutely, and I think Debbie said it many times, make lemonade from lemon, and you're seeing it's happening more in Quebec. I can tell you, in recent years in Quebec, we've had kind of like year ups and down. 2021 was the greatest vintage on history. Pinot Noir winemaker were making wine at 13% alcohol naturally. Ever seen before, because usually they chaptalize to get to that. Then the following year, we had the most challenging, this season that just came, Everyone finished exhausted, fungal disease, everything you can imagine. It was extremely difficult. And, a few years ago, they had a very challenging year. And one of the most regarded producers, the Melanie, he makes fantastic wines. And he said, I lost almost everything. And I was looking to the future thinking, how am I going to be able to survive if this happened again and again? And he had around his property all of those apple trees that were there, and he was not doing anything with it because they were not the proper type of apple in his mind for cider. So it's like, you know what, I have nothing to lose. He got all of those apples from the trees, and he's now making the best apple cider in Quebec. There's a lineup for it. And he's like, okay, well, I have this set up, so it's going to help me in years that it's more difficult. And the other thing is, we just had every year in Quebec, all the growers meet. It's only for the Quebec producers, and they bring in experts to talk about a lot of different things behind closed doors. I was on a panel, and I was also attending. And they wanted a bunch of us on the panel who have a chance to travel the world and kind of give them feedbacks on what they could learn from it. And one of the things we all said is, you're trying to chaptalize your wine to get higher alcohol, while the rest of the world is actually investing in research. New Zealand has a program right now. They have invested $4 million to find a way to harvest earlier so that they can make wine with lower alcohol. You have this naturally. Currently, a region like Quebec, like Nova Scotia, you have what the world is looking for. You're making wines with lower alcohol. Don't try to push it. This is what the consumers are wanting right now. So as a bracket, make lemonade from lemon. There's a lot of things that you have going for you. I want to move to talking about Tidal Bay. I think it was a very smart thing that Nova Scotia has done, is to have an appellation around a wine style that everyone in the region can make, that's really representative of the region. I love it. It's fresh, it's bright, it's crisp, it's low alcohol. You can drink a few more glasses. Having made that style and appellation, how do you see Tidal Bay evolving? And this is a question for the three of you. How do you still see Tidal Bay evolving over the years with climate change? Will it still be relevant 10 years from now, you think?
Well, I will say this: the crop this year, like for 2023, as it pertains to Tidal Bay in particular, because that's just what comes to mind. Like, let's talk about the immediate future of Tidal Bay in the context of the polar vortex. Well, clearly, the hybrid varieties, which are the heart and soul of Tidal Bay, because the three primary varieties are Lacadie, Ceval, and Vidal. So it has to be made of a majority of these three varieties combined. So there's this inevitable kind of link and correlation between Tidal Bay and the fate of the hybrid in the context of the polar vortex. They did better than the vinifera on aggregate. We're looking at, I don't know, what would you say, Mike, like 70%, like about 30% damage, or, maybe something like that, or maybe 50%?
30 to 50 would be fair, JB, yeah.
So what's likely to happen, I think, in the immediate future is that our bounty of hybrid variety, like if perhaps in an historical context, would have been something that we would have assigned, different places. Well, that's clearly going to be channeled to Tidal Bay as a priority. So that's one thing that we can expect in the immediate future of Tidal Bay. And then we certainly don't want a spring frost, right? Like I think that the risk of a spring frost, like we're not past that window, and there's a bit of a premium on the importance of not having one as it pertains to Tidal Bay, because we know that the yields are already jeopardized a little bit. So stylistically, again, I think it can probably enter the category of these forgiving margin of errors stylistically that are built into our ecosystems and our microclimates here, which is that I know Alana's here. She works with the tasting panel. I don't think that we've seen across the board a lack of acidity in Tidal Bay or a lack of aromatics in recent years, like especially more solar vintages like 2020. So I think it's a very sustainable style for the province that can be replicated relatively seamlessly in the future. And I think there's this like immediate hurdle, which is how is going to be, what's the appellation going to look like in 2023?
Yeah, I totally agree with Jean-Benoît. It's a testament this year to look and say how resilient Tidal Bay is. And with all of us at the table pushing for our Tidal Bays, we see a wine, reaching exceptional growth year over year. It's something we can all share and talk about without competition. I mean, maybe there's competition, but it's good competition. We're supporting one another when we support any Tidal Bay. The other juxtaposition when we started to think as a region about creating the Tidal Bay or the regional appellational wine, it was a place for the hybrids named Geisenheim and all the other funky hybrids that we had that no other consumer elsewhere knew what it was. Now, since there's been a real uptick on hybrid wines, and we're happy to say that hopefully some of those days are nearing the end where people want to try them and learn more about them. But there was a time when products like Nova 7 and products like Tidal Bay were absolutely perfect for our regional hybridic wines. So I think that's another great important factor.
And I think it's such a good case for doing what the region is meant to do. Often as a new region, people try to plant everything and they try to be something else they're not. And I have so much respect for saying, you know what, this is what we do. This is our style. We're going to embrace it and we are going to market it. And I think it's extremely important and very smart.
Do you mind if I? So Beausoleil, as of yet, does not do a Tidal Bay. We are not yet members of Wine Growers or Nova Scotia, and unfortunately, the polar vortex, I think, has pushed my timeline for that a bit farther. So I'm going to speak on this as a lover of the Tidal Bay wine, and I think that it's a really smart thing the province has done. Nova Scotians have rallied behind it. There is a sense of excitement and joy every year when that new vintage gets released. And, in terms of thinking about mitigating your risk in the vineyard, I think that, and thinking about sustainability for future vintages and whatnot, we've seen Tidal Bay change, I think, from its first concept to what we've been getting most recently, where we're adding more vinifera varieties into the blends to make them a little bit more complex, have a little bit more body, just give them a little bit more structure. Tidal Bays with Chardonnay and Riesling and whatnot. I think that evolution of Tidal Bay is very, very important. And being able to go back to the core hybrid varieties in years where we're not able to lend those vinifera varieties into the blends is definitely a strength. Any grower, I think, that is thinking about the future of their vineyard or starting a vineyard in Nova Scotia, I think it's really, really important that to mitigate your risk, you think about putting varieties that are in demand for Tidal Bay as part of your growing program. That is just something I think that is really, really smart. Will help you through those lean years. We're going to see that coming out of this event, that vineyard health, plant health is going to be of the utmost importance. You're right, Mike, that some of the hybrid varieties that have come in through the vineyard expansion program that really built up the vineyards in Nova Scotia. Some of that was dirty plant material, and we're going to see that those plants are going to struggle in particular, even though they are hybrids. Working to bring in clean plant material is going to be of the utmost importance, and we're going to need to, I think, still rely on those hybrid varieties that Nova Scotians have rallied behind and know about. I think Nova Scotians know Lac Blanc. They now know what Geisenheim is. New York Muscat is loved. It's a really smart and clever thing that has been created here in Nova Scotia.
I'm going to have one more question for you before we take the questions from the audience. Debbie has been talking about planning for the future. We need to be proactive rather than reactive. So keeping in theme with the wine style, when you look to the future, maybe each of you, how do you think the wine style at your winery will evolve or stay the same? But how do you foresee the directions of the wine style you have at your winery? Mike, I'll start with you.
We have it's a family operation, so we have a very strong ethos of what we're doing now. Likely we'll try to stay the course. Because we're positioned geographically, that is number one, we feel in a very lovely area for viticulture, very privileged actually. But two, for marketing purposes, we're on the main road, or the Spring Garden Road, I like to joke about, of the wine industry. And so we knew opening with a large building, and our ethos in the vineyard was to plant varietals that were multi-purposed. A lot of our vines can be made in 3 different distinct wine types. What we thought, Keck Francos, or red, a deep bull's blood red. On a couple of occasions, in hot vintages, we made lovely, lovely red wine. Surprise, the rosé is flying off the shelf. We can't get enough. So in a marginal year, we decided, hell, we'll make a rosé. And so that's the ethos of our vineyard. We look to the vineyard throughout the year, and we try to pivot accordingly. And so we have a lot of varietals because we know we have a wide audience just because of our geographic location and the size of our operation. That's how we've kitted it out. So I don't see us doing too much different other than every decision that we make here is first decided about quality. So I know our winemaker, Josh, in the back, and his team, every time we make a decision in the vineyard, it's always what affects the wine's quality first. And then everything else comes accordingly. And that's the ethos of us, and that's what I think we'll still concentrate on.
Thank you. Melanie?
So I think at Beausoleil, I'm very much with Mike in terms of we need to take each vintage for what it is, and we need to remain flexible about what's possible. And one of the nice things about being really small is that you can be incredibly reactive in terms of what people are responding to, and you're not sitting on pallets of things. You're only sitting on so many cases, and you can pivot and say, okay, well, it was more rosé that people really liked. Let's do that. I really see our program being focused, year over year on exploring, continue to explore, what we can do with the vinous ciders, cider and wine blends, continue to explore, the types of wines that we can create with our vinifera varieties that hopefully have survived or will be replanted. I think it's an opportunity that we think about, every site in terms of what should be going into the ground. I know we're probably the only small farm winery in the province that is a small farm winery, a commercial grower. We actually grow for another winery, and also work with other growers. And so we love sort of like keeping our nose to the ground of the farming community and seeing what's possible year over year. So that's really what we're focused on.
Thank you. Jean-Benoît, you have the final words.
Oh, well. We have someone in attendance. Her name is Nicole Campbell from Toronto, a distinguished guest of honor, and she has an operation there called Grape Witches, which is a wine store, but also much more than that, a wine club, and really a community. And over there, there is something very interesting that takes place, which is that she was able to create an audience that will discover the sensory experience of the wine based on other like metrics, of metrics of sustainability, whether that is, climate action, climate resilience, social justice, equality, inclusivity, all of those things are now defining the wine just as much as the sensory experience itself. Make no mistake. It can happen. And so you were talking about Domaine du Nival in Quebec, and the panel was also talking about this stigma around hybrids, like being a thing of the past. That is also in the same category, which means that there is a new demographic of consumers that are valuing the wine based on new metrics. So they want to know, like, what human beings are you, and what are your practices. And so I think the evolution, that you can expect at Benjamin Bridge in the next couple of years is that we will live in that low to no alcohol space more and more, and that we will, focus on our identity as a community project and build sustainability from the ground up that way. Yesterday, actually both Michael and Beatrice asked me, said, well, we've noticed some changes at Benjamin Bridge, like more democratic products, like in recent years. Absolutely. More so than the traditional pursuit of status of 20 years ago. I don't think that consumers on a going forward basis are going to be excited about participating in someone else's accumulation of wealth. That's the model of the 80s. And so I think that is what is to be expected from Benjamin Bridge is, a diversification of the metrics of valuation of wine and how and why it's relevant.
I think it's a very, very good way, an inspiring way to finish this panel discussion. The consumer of tomorrow is going to be a very different consumer that's a bit more aligned with sustainability, and I think it's very, very good points that you just made and very, very important. We have a few minutes for questions in the audience. We have a microphone here. So Mark, the wolf here, if there's any questions, he will be able to come and see you. Anyone for any questions in the audience? Yes, someone has a question in the back.
Have we entertained a co-op program before, like they do in parts of the French, where you bring your jug back and fill it up? And what would that take? Who do we have to write?
Is it like filling the wines at the winery directly? Is that what you're talking about? I'm not.
Yes, I believe
yes, that's
so,
what
yeah. Well, maybe not in the form of a co-op, but I do know that we at Benjamin Bridge we do have. It's not in action yet, but we do have some bigger containers, and the idea, like would be for community members to be able to come to the winery and reuse the same container, like a growler system a little bit. That's one thing that comes to mind. And maybe, I know that wasn't your question, but I think that home winemaking, also has to be explored. I mean, that is probably, on a scale of sustainability, although it may not be traditionally speaking, in the best interest of a commercial winery. This could be a bit of a competing offer, but it certainly has an upside because you're recycling your own bottles at home, right? So.
I have a question.
Can
you hear me?
Okay. One more question, yes.
Yes, I'm Cheryl Nettleton from the Council of Sustainable Industries, Quebec. And I do like what you're saying, Jean-Benoît. And I think that over the years, you've been seeing more discussions and more awareness from the public as well as organizations about climate change and looking for sustainable action plans. So I would say to you, keep on going with it, explore it, and it's the communication piece that is starting to grow as well. And you will start to get communications even beyond this sector to have customers being more aware of better ways to purchase and who are the companies doing it, and you will get it. So it's a step approach. I call it a Japanese Kaizen approach. You kind of have to expect that it's going to take some time, but it will get there, I'm sure. It's just, I think it's a great idea, though.
Thank you. Great comments. Any other question before we go to the other panel? Yes. I love how we're going. Mark is going back and forth.
I can have there now.
He's doing his step for the day.
Thank you. Deborah, a bit earlier, talked about the importance of working together, and she was mentioning academia, industry, and the government. But I'm just wondering in what extent the government of Nova Scotia is helping the wine industry to both mitigate or to adapt to climate change, and which role should the political institution play in the future?
Who's going to take that one?
Michael, of course, you got to take that one. How much time do you guys have?
Yeah, I might need you as investors once these comments are made. Traditionally, the government, well, there was a study several years ago called Nova Scotia One, the Ivany Report. And it was a group of industry business leaders that came together to kind of fix Nova Scotia's economic problems. I think the COVID did more for us, for our economy, driving folks from Ontario to Nova Scotia than any of these studies and millions of dollars that they've spent. One of the industries identified as a way out of economic disparity was our industry, the wine industry, tourism, and diverting imports through our export program of all agricultural products, not only wine, but everything agriculture. And that was an NDP government, if I remember correctly. Regardless, most of the other governments since has adopted that. We're having a hard time with our new government trying to talk about our relevance in regard to what we bring to Nova Scotia by way of jobs and economic activity. If, for instance, Michelin, and I'm on a rant now, I know it, so I'll be careful. If Michelin had an issue and there was, several $1 million at risk and 1,000 employees' jobs, which is pretty much exactly where we are, 250 million to our local economy and 1,100 or so jobs at risk, the government would run and rally and do everything that they could to help that industry. And not to say that they turned a blind eye to us, but red tape is our biggest nemesis. If we could somehow navigate away from bureaucracy, if they would collaborate with industry wholesomely, not figuratively, but real collaboration early on initiatives, we could really drive the economy in Nova Scotia, the rural economy in Nova Scotia, actually, where we need the jobs out here in the country. So I think there's a lot more education. I don't know if I've answered even half of your question. I'm sorry, but I did get the platform, so I took it. Government could do a lot more with collaboration, but it has to start, with the true want to listen and include the industry on the way forward. But we can do great things together if they allow us a part of it.
Anyone dying to add to this, or?
No. Not in front of the camera, I think.
It's getting recorded. I think I'm going to hand this panel on this. Thank you very much. Lots of great insights here from all of you, and I really want to thank each of you for sharing those thoughts, and hopefully it resonates in different ways for you who are listening to those fantastic panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I would like to invite to the stage Heather Rankin from Obladee, Sunil Sarwal, the brand strategist at the Small Monsters, Theresa Hawks, sales manager at the Martime Label and Packaging, and Matt Rogers, owner of Bishop's. And Mark, I'm going to take back that microphone for now. You can have a seat. I'm going to stand up. Yeah, it was planned that way.
Thank you.
we initially had 3 people, but I just wanted to hear from all of those people. So I could not, I wanted to make sure that the 4 of them were part of the discussion. I always like to say that, when I say from the vineyard to the glass, it means from the producer all the way to the journalist, to the sommelier. At the end, if those selling the product have the link directly to the consumer. Unfortunately, the wine industry has done a very poor job sharing all of the things that we have that those young consumers want. We're losing the young consumers to spirit, to ready-to-drink, to cocktails, to beer, and this is something that's happening in every country in the world. I was at an event in Spain earlier this year, and we looked around, and there were no young consumer. It was all the baby boomers there enjoying the wines, and so we talked. I showed you earlier in the slide the carbon footprint of the packaging, and interestingly enough, if we look at the ready-to-drink, people are going for the white cloth in a can. We can see on the can the number of calories. They have done a job at communicating to those young people that this is good for them somehow. Wine is way better. So I have a mix of people on this panel that all have a different background, and we're going to try to look at how we can do a better job to communicate to those consumers effectively, whether it's on the retail, restaurant side, or directly on the bottle when someone comes in a store left to their own device, and how can we make sure that they pick that sustainable bottle of wine. Sunil, you are a brand strategist. You work for yourself, and you consult for a lot of business that are not necessarily to do with wine. I know that we had the Libra upstairs, the non-alcoholic beer, and I know you've worked with them, but I also know that you work with non-wine industry. So my question to you, from your knowledge, from your understanding, what can the wine industry learn from what you do, and you work in other industry, what can we learn from you to communicate better to consumer on the packaging itself?
Sure. Thank you very much. So as Michelle said, I am a brand strategist. I specialize in companies that are in the food and drink industry. But unlike, I think, all of you here tonight, I am an outsider to the wine industry. So I can share with you some of the advice that I give to my food and drink clients and how they communicate their story to their markets. Now, Michelle, there's a long answer that I could give you.
I know. I know it's complicated, and we need more than a few minutes.
Exactly.
But maybe the key points that we can learn from you.
So the long answer would have involved finding your story and crafting that story, and then finding your audience, and then expressing that story to the audience. I'm going to skip the first 2 steps, and if folks are interested, maybe it'll come up in the questions or find me afterwards. I'm going to skip straight to how do you express that story that you already have to your audience that you've already found. So the way to do that is to be very clear, to be very concise in your story, and to be very consistent when you tell it. And what I mean by consistent is on every brand touch point that you have. So if it's on your packaging, if it's on your website, if it's on your advertising, or if it's in your tasting room, be consistent about the story that you're telling, so that everything that you create, you ask yourself, are we effectively telling to the consumers the story that we want to tell that sets us apart from other people? Now, when I was young, the way we would tell the story would simply be to put it on the back of the box. But of course, the days of sitting there at the breakfast table and reading the back of your cereal box is long over. In the mornings now, we're looking at our phones, not the back of that box. So if you want to get your story out to your audience, you've got to get it where those people's eyes are. You've got to get it on their phones. So luckily, social media is a great tool for my clients. And one of the great things about social media advertising is in the same way that I would advise my clients to find their niche market, social media allows you to target with your advertising, with your story, that clear, concise story, those same people so that they're seeing it, you're making an emotional connection to them, and you're getting their attention and swaying them, persuading them. So that would be my key. Message is have that clear, concise story, make it consistent across all your touch points, and get it out to your target market via social media. I can expand on that, or do you?
You go, yes, go.
Okay.
Yes, I want more. Yes.
One example I like to use about being consistent in their message is Apple. Apple's a great example because one, we all know it because they're kind of everywhere. And two, they're great because they actually are very good at being consistent. So if I were to ask you, what's Apple's brand story? Anybody want to shout out what they think Apple's brand story is, what they feel it is? That's an interesting answer. They do talk a lot about Steve Jobs. They're not doing what we would call a founder's story. Apple's story is basically, your life's not so great. There's a lot of drudgery. You're stuck at work all the time. You're doing spreadsheets. It's not a lot of fun. And if you have Apple products, it can be a lot better. Basically, they're saying your life's not great because of Microsoft and Office 365, and we're the opposite of that. So how do they express that to you? You probably noticed when you bought an iMac or an iPhone, there was no story on the back of that box. They're expressing it to you in their tone of voice, in the images that they're using. Think about the images that they show you when you see an Apple product. It's never spreadsheets. It's people being creative. It's people making music. It's people drawing. It's people dancing. It's young folk. It's creative professionals like myself. That's what they show you. And they're saying your life could be like that. You could be like that. You could have a fun life if you buy an Apple product. That's how they express their story. It's also in the choice of the words they use, the tone of voice, very simple, very friendly. It's in the fonts that they use. They're very, very consistent. They're so good at being consistent in their brand image that a funny thing, you often see iPhones, for instance, in movies. One thing is that they will not allow a film director to give an iPhone to a film's villain. If you're a bad guy, you can't have an iPhone because that goes against their brand image, and they are so careful about always preserving their brand image. So if you happen to be watching a murder mystery and somebody pulls out a Google Fold 5, there's your killer right there. The bad guy never gets an iPhone. So the key is be clear, be consistent. It's not just about the words you say. It's about every single thing that you're saying, the images you use, the people that represent you, the people that answer the phone when a customer calls. All of those things, make sure you're telling your story clearly, simply, and effectively. Thank you.
I think you made such an interesting point. There's a lot of wine producers out there still thinking that back labels are the best way to communicate to consumer. It's not. They've done a lot of research, the psychologists, how the brain works. And basically, there's one side of your brain that you will keep for important decision. The education of your kids, all things that really matters, you're going to use the energy from that side of the brain for things that matters. When you're left to your own device to buy a bottle of wine, when your kids are in the car and you're running before dinner, you're not going to stand there in front of a bottle waiting the pros and cons of sustainability to make the right decision. You need to buy a bottle now, and you're certainly not going to read the back label. You're in a hurry. That's how most wine purchases are done. Those wine geeks, those of us who spend time at the liquor store, half an hour because we love it, it represents a small percentage of the consumer. And when you're saying getting that emotional connection, that image, that clear message, the wine industry really, really need to learn from that. And that's such a really important point. We'll come back to you in a bit, but thank you so much this is a great, great start. I'm going to go move on with Theresa. Packaging involves label. We often talk about, pouch, bag-in-box, bottles, but the label itself can be more sustainable. And at Martime Labeling and Packaging, you've done an amazing job in offering more sustainable options to producer. Can you talk a little bit about your work and what you're offering them?
Yes, of course. And I will have to be like Sunil and try and keep it short because I'm very passionate about what I do. So I'll try not to take too long.
Can everyone hear Theresa in
Can
the
everybody
back?
hear me in the back?
Perfect.
Yes.
Thank
Okay,
you.
great. Thank you so much. So aside from the actual material that the label is made out of, one of the things that we are very proud of is actually in our process before you even get to the label. So for those of you that don't know, we are fully digital printing label manufacturing. So with that process, we have only HP Indigo products, which is one of the most sustainable companies in the world. So our presses are manufactured CO2 neutral. They are stamped on the presses. So before you even get to the substrate, we can say that. The inks that are used are compostable and recyclable. So you can be rest assured that you're getting that piece as well. The factory where the inks are made has solar panels on the roof. So we're very proud to say that as well. What we can say as far as the actual substrates that your labels are printed on, we offer a wide range of 100% recycled, 100% cotton, 100% tree-free sugarcane. Also, this year, one of our suppliers has come out with, and I'm very excited to be in this room, it's 15% grape waste from winemaking that is in the substrate. 40% post-consumer waste, and then 45% of virgin wood pulp. So aside from those sustainable, 100% recycled, all of the materials that we purchase come from FSC certified forests.
Can you explain? I know what it is, but can you explain to everyone what that is?
Yes. So FSC stands for Forest Stewardship Council. So it is mandated that they are responsibly managed. They are very strong against deforestation. So we are proud to say that our materials come from FSC certified forests. The other thing to look at is, you peel the label off and you have your liner. So a lot of our liners, which would typically everybody would view as waste, so a lot of our papers can come now on a PET liner, which is 100% recyclable. So we are seeing more and more of that available. The challenge, I would say, is that at current state, it is more of a premium instead of a norm. So that is a challenge that all businesses are facing because everything is costing more right now. We have seen some improvements over the last several months, which is great because we hope that that will continue to come down. So that's something to look forward to as well. So we're very excited. The other thing, and I can't necessarily speak to numbers, but the rest of my team today is in the process of moving into our brand new building. So we've made sure to work with the government in capturing some more, how can we be eco-friendly in our new building? What can we offer aside from just our process and our papers? Another interesting fact, and again, I'm going to try not to bore you with numbers, but in our process, if you look at the setup waste, so in a traditional analog printing process, you can have 150 to 400 meters of setup waste before you get one good label. Because of our process and that we are a digital printer, we currently operate at 3 to 4 meters of setup waste. So you're greatly reducing that amount of waste material to get to that first good impression. The other thing is we have no minimum order quantities, again, just because of the process. So you're not sitting on excess inventory in a warehouse. If you have to have a design change, you're not then wasting material that's sitting there. It's made to order, We are very quick with our turnaround times. So there's no, I guess, pressure on the producer to have that excess inventory to get the lower price and to get those minimums.
Have you seen more producer get on that road with you? Are you finding it difficult, or you find that it's definitely a trend and you're getting more and more producer going to you?
We get a lot of questions. We are seeing a lot more, and not in just producers, but in all industries. Probably, I would say 50% of inquiries that I'm getting right now for new business is asking for a sustainable material. So that's great. Again, it is at a bit of a premium at this point because of supply and demand, but we do definitely see a lot more. The other thing is, though, that the papers that we have now are recyclable. So even if they're not made from recycled fibers, they are recyclable. So you can make that claim as well.
So I'm going to go back to you, Sunil. A producer going that way, making that extra step for those labels, you were saying, you know, you should share your story in some ways. If I'm a producer who's checking all the boxes and I want to share also what I'm doing for the labels, how would I share that to the consumer so that they feel I'm really doing everything?
Well, first of all, it's really, as we saw earlier, it's a really good selling point. We saw that the boomers, Generation X, they're not really responding as positively to sustainability, but with millennials and especially Generation Z, they really want to see that. They want to see that commitment. So if you build that into your story, it's going to help you to stand out. It gives people what we call in the industry a reason to believe and a reason to buy. And once it's woven into your story, like I said earlier, weave that story into every one of your touch points. Make it a part of what you're doing. If, for instance, the reason that you want somebody to buy your brand and not somebody else's is because you're environmentally sustainable, you could, for instance, rather than just say, look, buy us because our paper is, our label is recyclable, take it up a few levels and say, our product's coming from the earth, and without good stewardship of the earth, we're not going to have this product anymore. It matters to us. It matters to us as much as it matters to all of you out there. And this is who we are, and this is why we're doing these things. Make that your story, and then express that in every other thing that you do, so that your design looks and feels that way too. So even if somebody doesn't see that your label is recycled, they will get it. Patagonia is a great example of this. We all understand that environmental sustainability is key to what they're doing, and it's very important. And they're not putting a text paragraph about it on every single thing, but we know because it comes across in so many different ways. I would recommend doing it the same way. If it's a key to what your brand is all about, then make sure that you're expressing it in every one of your touch points.
And I love the Patagonia example. And also, you know, it's like when the iPhone comes out, the new model. Are people saying, well, we're going to go with the cheapest model? No, they want Apple. They want it, right? And we're talking a bit earlier about the millennials being willing to pay a few more dollars knowing that it was sustainable. So if you manage to get that emotional story towards the art, maybe your cost of production will be a bit higher, but you will also have a consumer at the end being willing to pay for that, right? So there's a cost to sustainability, and I think it also goes with moving forward, drinking less but better, right? It goes, I mean, at the end we can have all of the conference that we want. If we keep on consuming at the rate we're consuming everything, we have no chance to be sustainable. So I think going forward is that whether it's clothing or anything, we all need to consume less and better. And I think that's also part of the message that we need to convey to the consumer. Yes.
Could I know I've taken a lot of stage time here, I'm sorry. If I could just speak to that, the emotional connection, it is really key, and it's something that I tell all of my clients. It's one of the most important things to do, and there's a couple reasons for that. One is because it makes you memorable. When you make somebody feel something, they are going to remember you. Like Michelle said, my clients are in a grocery store, and it is really stressful. You know, you've got your kid crying, you've got the people coming this way. It's hard to find things. if they have a feeling for you and a feelings about your brand, about your company, about your product, it's much more likely that they're going to go back and get it each time. But one of the most important things is that when you engage somebody emotionally, you're not engaging them logically. And you don't want to get your clients thinking rationally about it. You want them to buy it because they love it. You use the example of Apple. It's true. When I want to get a new phone, I'm not checking to see if Microsoft or Google or Huawei has something cheaper because Apple's story appeals to me emotionally and tells me something about who I want to be as a person. In the same way, we did a protein bar a few years ago, and we could have come out and said, look, we're $4.99, 8 grams of protein. We're engaging the clients rationally, and it would work. It would sell until next year when somebody else comes out with a bar that's $3.99 and 12 grams of protein. Now, I've taught my clients to respond rationally. They're going to respond rationally, and my sales are going to drop. How did we get around that? We appealed, in this case, to triathletes, to athletes, and the bar was actually sustainable. It was made from cricket flour, and this was quite a few years ago when eating bugs was kind of a revolutionary, scary, weird thing. And so what we did is we built an emotional story around the environmental sustainability of that cricket flour protein. And what we said is, hey, look, if you folks are brave enough to run a triathlon, you're brave enough to eat bugs. We engaged with them emotionally instead of rationally, and it worked. They would buy it because they wanted to see themselves as this kind of person. Yeah, you know what? Maybe eating bugs seems scary, but I'm the kind of guy or girl that's not scared of these kinds of things, and I'm going to do it. So even if you're a little more expensive, even if you have competitors, when you engage people emotionally, you can get past a lot of hurdles, make a memorable connection, and a lasting connection.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to Matt and Heather. I want to talk about certification. That's something in terms of in that communication to the consumer. To me, that's really dear to my heart. At the end of the day, there's the certification are telling something. They're telling that the producer cares about the environment, and I know there's a lot of certification out there and they all have different rules and guidelines, but they all have something good in them. And there's an audit behind it, right? It's not saying, I'm doing this. No, there's an audit company going to see you and making sure that you are doing what you're saying you're doing. And I think not every producer will manage that brilliant marketing like Apple. And I think if you have that sustainable logo on your bottle, when you're left to your own device, it's certainly something that is helpful. And they actually done a lot of research on that too, with the consumer asking of all the logos. So they put biodynamic, organic, sustainable, natural wine all beside each other. And they've done some research on the consumer. And what came out of it is the word that they were the most familiar with was organic, because they already buy the organic food. So that's something that's really, but when we asked them what they thought of all those labels, what was the most impactful on the environment, everyone chose sustainable. They don't fully understand everything that involves, but the word itself, they feel that it's a more total action from the winery, from the producer. Heather, I'm going to go to you because you own a brilliant restaurant in Halifax. If you haven't been, you all have to go to Obladee. And you're doing an amazing job with your staff trying to communicate to your consumer sustainable product. You're buying sustainable product and you're really trying to communicate that. And I know you put some signs on the menu. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of certification for you? Does it matter when you buy a bottle?
Is my mic on here? Everybody
Yes.
can hear me? Okay. I guess when you have a business, you have to sort of put your own thoughts and intentions aside and think about what is best for the business and what you think your guests are looking for, and things like that. I think what certification does is, for the people who know that wine can be certified and that wine is prone to all sorts of toxins, just like their food is. It's really important for them to put their finger down a list and say, oh, that's organic, that's sustainable, that's biodynamic, I'd like to go with that one. But there's also a whole host of wine lovers out there that have no idea that wine might be prone to the same sorts of toxins that these foods that they wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. So those people are like, oh, they still imagine, they still have these very romantic notions of how wine is made. They do believe that it's grown by one person, a farmer with a flat tweed cap, walking through the vineyards, checking everything by hand and moving it all into this dark cellar. They actually believe that wine is an organic product. So when we do teach them, and we do a lot of education in Obladee, both with our staff and with guests, they're very surprised to learn that grapes are part of the, dirty dozen, I think they used to call them. I don't know if they still are. So for them, it's really important to, and like you were saying before, I think a few other people were saying that people are bombarded with information these days. The phone is going off, your kids are crying. There's so many distractions, so many influences, that what a certification does is it allows you to quickly identify the type of wine that you want to buy without stopping and having to read that back label. Also, food, wine is not classified in Canada as a food. It's I think the regs say standard alcoholic beverage. So it doesn't have an ingredient list on the side of the bottle. So consumers don't have that option of just looking down to see what that wine might contain and bypassing that product if they wanted to choose something a bit cleaner. So again, certification I think helps clear up a bit of that mystery. I think people really want transparency.
Thank you, Heather. Matt, you own Bishop Cellar, a well-known store in Halifax. When you're making the wine purchase for your store, do certification matter? Is it something that you look at?
So small owner in Bishop Cellar, but I've been a part of it for a long time. This year we're celebrating 20 years. And since the beginning, we have worked with small farmers from... Can
you bring your microphone?
Sorry,
yeah,
from around the globe. Very much have held the ethos that it's an agricultural product. And we've been very passionate about finding wines that were made organic, sustainable. It's usually one of the first questions that we ask. Having some experience in this industry for almost 20 years, we've seen the spectrum and we've seen the abuses of the word sustainable. So I've been around long enough to know that sustainable is not a certification mark, and it's been used by larger companies because it is a word that does resonate. We've watched organic take a long period of time for quality to be there. Organic wine, it used to be a negative title to a wine because the quality was so poor. Yes. So I think it's great that certifications are there. I think to Heather's point, her clientele, we see it as well with a specialty store of those that are interested, but we see a lot that don't have the education. So there is so much information. The reality is most wine consumers don't know much about it at all. Mm-hmm. So they do help their, anything that can help navigate this this whole ecosystem, I think is great. I think we are going into an era where we have to pay a lot more attention to it. As you said, the next generation, it is very important to them. And as an industry, we've done a terrible job, to be blunt. Talking about labeling, labeling standards. Paul Draper from Ridge has been doing it for 30 years, and we still don't know that there are 75 ingredients that you can put in a wine in California. And if people knew that, I think there would be a different conversations that are happening. So we've hidden behind the lack of transparency, so the more the better.
And just as a little bracket, the ingredients is going to be mandatory in Europe in 2023. Yeah. It's going to be by QR code. So people in Europe are really stressed about that. Mm-hmm. But you're going to have with your phone a QR code. If you sell your wine within Europe, it's going to be mandatory to put all of not the processing, and this is really important to make the difference. Processing ingredient is not considered an ingredient. What will be considered in, so if you add yeast to ferment, it's not going to be on that list because it's a processing ingredient and it's not left at the end. But all the ingredients remaining in the wine will have to be on that label. If it's coming in Europe, I think that we're going to see that elsewhere. It's the big elephant in the room. The wine industry has been getting away with it for a very long time, and we're going to see a lot of change, and it's going to be interesting how it's going to impact the production of wine from that. Going back to both Matt and Heather, if you could share what you do specifically, maybe to educate consumer towards a more sustainable wine purchase.
Start. So for us, education has been the heart of what we do since the beginning. We have always paid for our staff, hourly staff, to take CAPS courses, anything in the wine side. We now have an internal wine education program that we run, so we're training our staff. We're not just expecting them to be out there and learning themselves. We're doing it as part of what we do to train. Our website is very extensive. Alana in the room, Catherine, they manage and oversee that. Our website is very, very detailed. And, you know, it comes down to us constantly talking about it and making sure that our staff are talking about it. At the end of the day, as much as I know how that wine was produced or talking to the producer, I'm not on the floor, or I'm not the one involved in that transaction. It has to be our frontline staff. So we really invest a lot of time in our frontline staff and ensure that they're knowledgeable so they can talk about that and make that point of differentiation. So,
Heather?
Yeah, we do the same with our staff as well. I just don't think there are a plethora of people with wine education, particularly sustainable wine education, just roaming the streets looking to work in hospitality. And we're very realistic about that. So we do make sure that we do hire sort of like-minded people that are interested in working in an environment that likes to champion sustainably made wine and just high-quality products that are made with responsibility and things like that. We also only source wines that have been made, at least, I know sustainable is a large catchphrase, but it does take some digging to dig up the story on the person who is making the wine. And you can tell pretty quickly if you do some research whether there is a human being behind this wine, there's an intention behind this wine, and that is almost more important than a big glitzy website with a portfolio of hundreds of wines, and one of them happens to be natural and organic. So we do a lot of that research. We source out those wines. We identify every wine on the list as being sustainable, organic, or biodynamic. We do a lot of educational courses at Obladee featuring all of those wines. So right now we're conducting a Spain and Portugal class, and all of those Spanish and Portuguese wines are sustainably produced. And then tastings, more informal tastings that we offer the public will come in. We talk to them about natural wines and environmentally friendly wines, and we get groups of people on bachelorette parties, and they'll book a natural wine tasting, and we're with them for an hour and a half. They're coming in with their boas and balloons and all the other paraphernalia you can imagine. And then, 20 minutes in, they're going, so what? Wine is, you can actually ferment it with wild yeast? Wow, I had no idea. So people are really excited to learn about these types of wines. So those are some avenues that we use.
Just going to add to that. I think it's a good point that Heather made about knowing the intention and the person behind the wine, because Sunil, talking about the story, we work with a lot of small farmers. So when you talk to them about organic, why would I put that on the label? Why would I register? It's paperwork. They're usually small domains. They've been farming for centuries. That's all they've known. So they don't know to do that. So that doesn't, when you just rely on certifications, sometimes you can get down and miss that there is a person behind that wine, or that, you know, they would be certified organic, but that one little bit of spray that they did saved their crop for 2 years, or that they'd have to hire 3 extra people to just do that. So, you know, the whole sustainable piece and understanding the people behind it, I think, is really important, and knowing who's making that wine, because if you just rely on the sustainable mark, or you don't do your research, then that's when you can, you know, like Heather said, there can be big non-sustainable wine companies that greenwash,
Yes.
and use that tag on one wine or one line of wines.
Yes.
And, you know, in the scheme of things, are they that much better? Probably not.
Yeah. Do your research. And I think, before I take your question, it's a great way to wrap. Don't, you know, if you sit in this audience and you're a retailer, you work at a retail store, you're a sommelier, never underestimate the power you have in educating the consumer. I'm going to give you an example. Heather talked about natural wine. Right now, when you walk into the SAQ, you see a section for natural wine, you see a section for orange wine. The consumer did not wake up one day and say, I love orange wine, I love natural wine. Someone told them about them. I went to the Raw Wine Festival in Montreal. It was sold out within an hour. It was packed with people. Those consumers learned about those wines somewhere from you. You told them that this was great. They listened to you and they purchased. Who would have thought that orange wine was going to be a wine section in a monopoly like the SAQ or natural wine? What if we did the same thing with producers who are doing the right thing? We could create an amazing, amazing movement, right? So never underestimate the power that you all have in directing the consumer to the right product. I would love to take questions in the audience. Mark? Yeah. He wants to make more steps, so we're going to... Any questions from the audience?
I know that we talked earlier about packaging and how important that can be moving forward. How can we, in this room in particular, help educate consumers that alternate packaging is viable? Because while it's a great idea currently, we don't see the buy-in from consumers at this point.
I'm going to let the panel answer this, but I just, you know, as a hope, in Norway and Sweden, 52% of the wine bought by consumer are in bag-in-box, high level, high quality. So it's possible, but then I think Heather has some thoughts about that. I can see you.
Well, I just think you said it too, and I do think it's an accessibility issue out here, and all you really need, the simplest way forward would be to have credible producers put their wines in these alternative packaging options. Because I think, as JB was saying earlier, the younger population are cool with it. They don't really mind, and they are already sustainable aligned, more so naturally. They're kind of with it. So we don't have to spend time convincing them that it's okay, but we do need to get these better wines packaged in these alternative forms of packaging, like bag-in-box, Tetris packs, cans, things like that.
And I think some of the producers are doing it, but I think it depends on the province too. Also, the monopoly has a role to do. Yes. Like I know that in Quebec, even though the good quality wines are available in bag-in-box, the monopoly will not buy it because they think the consumer are not going to buy it if it's a more premium price in bag-in-box. So it's kind of a vicious circle. Last year in Quebec, we had Pacalais, a great producer in the Beausoleil, did a bag-in-box. It sold within 3 weeks. All of it. The warehouse was empty. So to your point, Heather, the solution is to find high quality, and people will be behind. I really believe that. Yeah.
I think, you know, a lot of what we've talked about today, I think we're at a bit of a crossroads in the wine industry right now. The wine industry struggled with progress. It's very rooted in tradition. So when you're dealing with an industry that by nature talks about generations, talks about its history, is rooted in appellation rules and things of that nature, things move slow. And even here at home, you know, we just recently put Tidal Bay in cans. Now, there's an argument that's great product, viable for cans, which is true. Some wineries, it was their top wine. So there's a perception, is their top wine going to go into a can? There's concerns about, are the liners of the can going to work with the total acidity that we have in the wine? So I think we're at this crossroads right now in the wine space of dealing with the next generation of consumer, but we've invested so much in history and tradition that, you know, we have to start to make some of those decisions. If not, our lunch is going to continue to get eaten by all these other categories that can move much quicker than we can, say, with planting vineyards that take 5 years to come to fruition. So speed has never been the wine industry's, you know, best trait, and I think we have to fix that.
Great answer. Any more question for our great panelists? No? I want to thank everyone for coming here today. It's great to see a room full of people. If you're here, it's because you're interested in being part of this change. So I hope that today you've learned a thing or two, and I hope that when you walk out the door, you have a conversation with a friend who wasn't there today about one thing or two that you've learned, and maybe you're going to inspire them also to take that path that we are taking here today. So thank you very much. Thanks again to Lightfoot and Wolfville for hosting it. Thanks to all of the sponsors. Thank you so much, Marc de Wolf, for helping me in this journey of doing this event here in Nova Scotia. It's been a privilege. I hope to be back, and I hope to see you out there. Thank you so much, everyone.